Divorce lawyers of Reddit, what plot twists, or crazy antics or demands have you seen go down from either spouse? Story from my parents who are lawyers. So throughout the divorce proceedings, there was a car that was a huge point of contention between the husband and wife. After months and months of saying he would never let the wife have the car, the husband concedes in exchange for something great, like one of their summer houses. It turns out he had been driving the car for 3 hours every day in a big loop around the city, putting thousands and thousands of miles on it, basically making it worthless. The amount of planning and spite that went into that was amazing. Should put it on jack stands and set the cruise control to 120 miles per hour. Get miles faster with less effort. Never tried it, just an idea. I'm an accountant, not a divorce lawyer. Had a client hide Ziploc bags of ground meat throughout the house, in air vents, the attic, behind water heater, etc. I think it was at least 20-30 bags that took months to find all of them. Parents' divorce seemed simple. Dad cheated on mom. Mom gets custody of me. Dad didn't like paying alimony and child support to the tune of $2k a month after he gave up rights. Dad had great idea. Pay a hitman $15k to kill soon to be ex-wife. Dad goes through with it. Idiot actually pays undercover cop the money. Dad then flies back to Canada, home, and wait for results. International task force is formed to try and detain him. Geraldo Rivera cover story. Idiot dad gets arrested in Toronto and flown back to California. In this process I was 3 in care of family back down south, mother in protection by police. Dad's family apparently wealthy, gets good lawyer, is charged with 17 felonies, can't remember how many he was convicted of. He gets 18 months. After all of this mom still had to sue for divorce. It took 2 years. A woman in my town is a principal at a local elementary school. She is in her mid-70s at least. I asked someone why she doesn't retire and they explained that she and her spouse went through a very contentious divorce about 15 years ago and she has to give him a portion of her retirement, so she has decided to never retire so he gets nothing. Ever. Ha 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 ha. My uncle represented this guy getting a divorce from his wife of 15 years. Super toxic breakup and they split everything 50/50. Even the land that the house they lived in sat upon. Well, she decides to build a house right behind the other house. Mind you, this was a lot of land, probably 200 yards separating both home sites, so that the back of the houses faced each other. The house gets built and my uncle gets a call from his client asking about the legality of a situation he had gotten himself into. Apparently his ex-wife would spend a lot of time in her backyard, so he saw her all the time. What he did was buy a female dog and name it the same name as his ex-wife. Anytime he would let his dog back in from letting her out, he would yell, "Susan, you be. Get in here." He would also yell if she was peeing on the flowers, "Susan, you be. Quit pee on the flowers," or "Susan, you be. Quit digging in the dirt." The ex-wife called the cops on him a couple of times, but there was nothing they could do because the dog was registered under the name of Susan, and it was in fact a bee, so there you go. This shouldn't be funny, but it really is. My mom was a real piece of work in this department. My mother is mentally unstable and was very abusive to me as a child. When my father finally moved out and asked for a divorce, I was luckily old enough, 13, to legally decide who I wanted to live with. I, of course, chose my dad, and that enraged my mother. By court order, she was allowed to live in our 4-bedroom house while me and my dad had to move in with my aunt into a 2-bedroom house. We lived there for 4 years while my mom did everything she could to slow down the divorce proceedings. During this period, my father was court ordered to pay the mortgage and utilities on the house my mother was living in. She would leave all the lights on and crank the heat with the windows open just to drive the utility bills up. She once left the garden hose on for a week into a drain to even make the water bill outrageous. When it was finally all over and she had taken my dad for as much as she could, she decided to sue him for my college fund. I called her and told her if she went through with it I would never speak to her again. She told me if I wanted it I needed to move in with her before I turned 18 so she could get child support from my dad. I refused. She won the case for the money and my dad had to use most of what was left of the fund to pay for her lawyer's costs. Row, what a bee. The couple separated 10 years ago but didn't officially divorce until a couple years ago. She was going to get his house so he burnt it down, then faxed her the transfer of ownership forms. He might be going to jail for arson though. Worked at a law firm that was subpoenaed as part of a divorce between a partner at the firm and a partner at another major law firm. The woman issued more than 70 subpoenas to banks, firms, investment companies, you name it, because she was convinced he had squirreled away $20 plus million overseas behind her back. It got so bad that she dug up receipts from 25 years ago to try to put together this grand conspiracy puzzle. In the end, after she racked up $1.5 million in legal fees and 7 different lawyers, the judge said this crap is ridiculous. There was no conspiracy, and you are not entitled to a portion of this phantom $20 million. Mind you, this was a major law firm partner who was acting this way. She made millions per year in her career, but she apparently lost her mind. Sounds to me like she had some money squirreled away and was looking for his stash to pilfer. My ex and I separated before the divorce. She agreed to watch the dog while I found a new place. She had the dog put down instead. At the time I worked on bank equipment. My favorite was opening safety deposit boxes for the bank. So I was asked to get there before the bank opened, which was odd. I show up and greet the bank employee along with a lawyer and a very angry looking woman. I get the lock open and swing the door open as the angry woman shouts let me in there, and I step outside the vault. That mother sucker and storms off. But she threw down a piece of paper that said frick you be. It had been a nasty divorce and the ex-husband got there before she did. The worst part about this story is we have no idea who was actually the bad guy here. My father went through the process recently. Amounts of money aren't the real concern. The assets must be split as close to 50/50 as possible. So the fricking over generally comes in the form of inequitable distribution of one-of-a-kind things. My father had a precious set of old, inexpensive kitchenware that his late mother gave him before he even married my mother. When the divorce went to mediation and she told the mediator that she wanted those pots and pans, she got them. She got them because she was willing to give up something else of equal monetary value, so something worth less than $10, and was willing to sit in mediation for hours, racking up thousands in lawyer fees for both sides, until my father consented. Again, an even financial trade, but a sentimental trade of overwhelming disparity. Just as a final frick you. Non-marital property that isn't intermingled, joint accounts, shouldn't be split during divorce. I met with a scummy one when I was looking to get a divorce. The first lawyer I met with, who had been recommended by a co-worker as an amazing divorce attorney, suggested that, if I wanted full custody, I should make sure people knew the relationship was abusive. Tell my friend's family. Make sure the neighbors heard me screaming begging him not to hit me. Document every bruise even if I wasn't sure it came from him. Thing is, my relationship wasn't abusive and I'd already told her that multiple times. She never outright said I should fabricate evidence or anything, but she ignored my repeated statements that there was no abuse and kept on with her detailed instructions of how to document any abuse that might happen. I got the distinct impression that she was letting me know how to create an abusive relationship out of thin air in order to get custody of my kids. I ended up not using her as an attorney, for obvious reasons, and in the end my ex and I shared 50/50 physical and legal custody of our children and raised them together despite whatever issues we had with each other. I can't help but wonder, though, how many dads lost a relationship with their kids because of her zealous coaching. Thank you for not being a complete butthole and making things worse for your kids. Kids can survive divorce if the parents can act like adults. I'm always impressed and envious when divorced parents are civil. Mine weren't. I literally didn't know it was possible. A friend of mine in high school worked at a pizza place. One of the delivery drivers was just ridiculously smart when I talked to him. Later I found out that he used to be a nuclear physicist. His wife was also a nuclear physicist, but left him for her lawyer. He got screwed out of his kids, most of the assets, and had to pay a lot towards alimony child support. He did the math and figured out the tips he didn't get taxed on, plus his minimum wage delivering pizza was more than keeping his job as a nuclear physicist. Plus he got a little satisfaction not having to pay her as much. The guy was really nice. I always felt bad for him. My dad actually got fricked by his divorce lawyer during my parents' divorce last year. My dad and my sister have never gotten along, and over the years it got more and more strained. They eventually got into a physical fight which led to a CPS report and him getting slapped with a child abuse record. They labeled it as confirmed but isolated, so he's not on the registry and you can only see it with certain background checks. In this case, my mom was obviously going to get full custody of my sister. My mom also wanted to give my dad the house, and his cars, and his money pit of a boat. Lawyer decided, because my dad is stubborn as frick, that he would string old dad along. Lawyer spent hours with my dad trying to convince him that dad could get more money and custody from my mom. They did a divorce mediation, so they wouldn't have to go to court, and lawyer dragged it out for 4 hours. The whole time he was riling my dad up, thinking he could get things like the original down payment on the house, half custody of my sister, my mom's car, etc. At the end of the 4 hours of mediation, lawyer told my dad he should take the deal that my mom and her lawyer had originally offered in the first place, and dad signed that, so he paid about $12,000 in completely unnecessary legal fees. What a piece of crap. I did surgical rotations with an OB-GYN and have personally seen the lowest of the low. In divorce hearings, people say a lot of crap when trying to place blame or get custody. A lot of it is straight up lies. Not all lies can be erased or taken back. The worst one is an accusation of sexual abuse. You cannot redact an accusation of sexual abuse against a minor. It happened ridiculously more frequently than I can stomach. A spouse, trying to get the upper hand, makes the claim. Now the lawyer court state is bound by law to investigate, and suddenly that precious, innocent child that mommy is trying to gain custody of is brought to the OR, sedated, and then investigated inside and out for evidence of abuse. Those are about the only days that nobody in the entire wing says anything. No jokes, no smiles. Just a sick feeling in your stomach that takes away all appetite and joy. So many times, the parent who makes the accusation finds out what they're about to put the child through, and tries to take it back, tries to cancel the procedure, tries to say they may have been confused or mistaken, or even admits they flat out lied. Doesn't matter. Once that box is opened, the investigation must continue. Of the couple dozen cases I saw, I can only recall one that supported the accusation. Freaking disgusting pieces of crap. Banker here had heaps of situations where joint overdraft credit card comes up just before divorce to the absolute surprise of one of the parties. Drained down to zero, of course. Especially sad when it's students, young kids who find themselves heartbroken after the breakup and with a debt they can't afford. My dad divorced his first wife and promptly took his name off of all the credit cards. She proceeded to buy all kinds of crap thinking she'd stick him with the bill. She was not happy to hear she was the only one on the account. Dad was a real butthole and mom tried to save him a lot of money during the divorce. They have 3 kids who were 16, 13, and 8. Dad wouldn't sign any agreement my mom's lawyer produced. It had to be his idea and from his lawyer or it wasn't getting signed. Dad's lawyer was incompetent and sends an agreement that states he will pay $2,000 a month in child support until all kids are 18. Mom tried to explain to dad that it needed to be revised to lower every time a child turned 18. Dad called mom a C during that negotiation, so mom said frick it and signed the agreement, and dad paid the $2,000 a month for 10 years when he should have been paying around $1,400 a month for 5 years and $700 a month for the last 5 years. Your mom sounds nice. No sarcasm, she tried. My 2 bosses were married and opened a bike shop together. He was the brains and the backbone since he was a former Olympic mechanic. She just sort of balanced the checkbook and worked a couple days a week. Unfortunately, he had no credit and she did, so when they opened everything was in her name. All he wanted in the divorce was the bike shop and was willing to buy her half. She wanted the bike shop too, but didn't want to buy him out for his half. Mind you, her father passed away and she was sitting on like $300k in the bank, and also had the audacity to take out student loans for her daughter to go to college. He lost the bike shop and I think he got a little bit of money for his share. What she didn't expect was that all of the high-paying customers would stop going there. They were all his friends or they only wanted him to work on their bikes. So I don't know why she would have had that notion. So he opened up his own bike shop and all of the regulars have become regulars at the new bike shop. Finally a story with some justice. This thread was stressing me out. Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What plot twists, or crazy antics or demands have you seen go down from either spouse? Took the couple 2 hours to decide who would get the groceries left in the fridge. Estimated value of the groceries was around $40. 2 hours of my time, opposing counsel time, and mediator time added up to about $1,000. It all came down to a Costco Sam's Club sized jar of peanut butter. Who keeps peanut butter in the fridge? This is what happens when you negotiate on an empty stomach. I had a couple arguing for 3 hours over who got the kids on Christmas Day, only to discover at the end that they were both Jewish. I had another woman who said that her husband drained $60,000 from their community bank account to pay for a sex change operation that he never told her he was planning to do. I hate it when I find out I'm Jewish. I was a clerk for a law firm in Marin County. The husband grew weed in the house. The town was supportive and even let him redo his electrical panel to accommodate his crop. Long story short, in the divorce, she demanded half of the weed proceeds. Today it doesn't seem like a big deal, but 12 years ago I was shocked to see that in a court document. My dad was a divorce attorney for some time. He said people would argue over $150 patio furniture for hours on end at a $300 HR rate each side. It's not about the patio furniture, it's about sending a message to your beloved ex-husband wife. I had a case where the estranged wife was calling my client's employer repeatedly, accusing him of theft and other white-collar crimes, to try getting my client fired. The thing is, the children were with her, and she was also demanding child support, which is based on his income, for the job from which she was trying to get him fired. Fortunately, the employer was onto her BS and my client wasn't let go. The ex-wife hid his artwork, works he had purchased long before the marriage, and in mediation she tried to sell it back to him. And then, not necessarily a crazy divorce story, but my dad is a lawyer and his friend has been married 3 times, so my dad has been his divorce lawyer twice and his best man 3 times. I love serial grooms brides. I have an uncle who has been married so many times, 5, that his own parents didn't even travel to his last 2 weddings. Grandma, I'm so excited to see you at Pete's wedding. Sorry, kid. I've got a bowling tournament that weekend and I've seen him get married plenty of times. My now ex-stepmother was getting an 80/20 settlement and refused to agree until the agreement was revised, include a bag of old beer can koozies and a dry rotted pool float. She was crazy, which is why dad was paying her to go away. I'm not a lawyer, but this is a story about my uncle and it's quite brilliant. My uncle has been a lifelong videographer and still works to this day as a news photographer. During the early to late 90s he stopped shooting news and started shooting freelance. This was before everyone and their moms had a camera editing software whatnot. Eventually he became a sought after photographer. In the 80s when he was working as a news photographer he met and married a reporter news anchor of which he would go on to have 2 children with. After leaving the news business to freelance he decided to start a video editing business with his wife. That went extremely well for a while and they were making money hand over fist. He would be asked to shoot for channels such as Food Network and HGTV, DIY, etc. and then edit it into the show. She would work as the middle woman for his clients and as bookkeeper. Eventually she would turn out to be a secret substance abuser and adulterer and their marriage ended in divorce. At this point my uncle was making a couple $100K a year with their business. She decided to sue him for alimony, mostly because he was worth a good chunk of change, but also because she helped him build his business. Her demands were ridiculous, something like 75% of the business for the next so many years or something crazy. My uncle's lawyer was afraid she was going to win because she had played such a big role in building the biz. Fast forward to court day, her lawyer stands in front of the judge and lists off what she wants in the divorce. Once he is finished it's my uncle's turn. He blindsides her and offers to give her 100% of the business. The judge and both lawyers are confused and ask him if he is sure. Without him shooting and editing there is no business. So basically she would be left with a heck of a lot less than she asking for by asking for X amount of profits. The judge reasoned that his offer was fair and that she could take it or leave it. She was P. Her lawyer was P and she ended up getting nothing. Haha. TL. DR. My uncle started a biz with his wife. She turned into a cheating drug addict. Divorce. She wanted X% of profits from biz and divorce. He offers her the entire business. Total awesome dong move. He is a photo editor, so she can't do crap with biz because she isn't a photo editor. She gets nothing. Your uncle is a genius. I love to read stories like this. I was in a mediation where it took the couple an hour and a half to split their personal property, retirement accounts, real property, and custody of their 6-month-old son. The rest of the day, about 4 hours, was spent arguing about how to split the time with the dog for the kid they just put, as agreed upon by the parties, but the dog had a strict calendared schedule, working out holidays and strict pickup drop-off times. I was ashamed to be a part of that unbelievable display. My parents stayed together for years because they couldn't agree on who got the dog when they divorced. They announced to my brother and I that they were divorcing the day we had to put the dog down. My friend's ex-husband tried to force their daughter to have to choose which parent she would live with every year on her birthday. The daughter wanted to live with mom. Dad is always out of town for work anyway. The judge told him that in no way was he going to force this girl to disappoint one of her parents every year on her birthday. Her ex-husband is a dong. Not a lawyer, but I work in a law office. We had a guy who cheated on his wife transfer all of his money, slowly over time, to his girlfriend before the wife found out about their affair and filed for bankruptcy to avoid having to give his now ex-wife anything in the divorce. That's dissipation of marital assets and the court would have ordered it returned. Also, bankruptcy judge has no authority over division of marital assets, child support, etc. Not a divorce attorney, but I clerked for a judge that handled divorce cases. We had a couple that were both lieutenant colonels in the Air Force. They had one daughter that was about 11 or 12. Both had graduate degrees and were generally intelligent people. Well, the husband had an affair and things went sour with the relationship. The daughter was at that age when her relationship with the mother was starting to get a little strained, and she mentioned how she wanted to stick with her dad because he was about to be stationed elsewhere and the parents would be going there. Separate ways. The mother absolutely freaked. The first thing she did was go to the local police department and claim the father had been molesting and raping the daughter. They investigated and couldn't find any evidence, so they dropped the case. The mother, still furious, then goes to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and reports the same thing. The Air Force then suspends the husband from duty and conducts their own investigation. Same result, no evidence of wrongdoing, and the case is dropped. The mother then goes to the next state over where the husband is about to be transferred and contacts the local police there with the same story about molestation and rape. They of course do their own investigation, but same result. Case is dropped. Of course, this whole time the daughter has been interviewed a dozen times by psychologists, various therapists, the police, the Air Force, and who knows else. The daughter is straight up traumatized by this. People constantly asking her if her dad had been touching her, raping her, and so forth. Not to mention the harm it did to her father's career. He was basically screwed from any possible promotion just because of the allegations, as well as the fact that infidelity in the military is a big no-no. But that was his own doing. Well, once word of all this gets back to the judge, he is furious. He's a former Air Force JAG and still has contacts in the ranks. Well, anyway, the couple comes in front of him one day for a hearing and he outright tells her she better stop this behavior or he is going to hold her in contempt of court for the maximum amount of time he can lawfully hold her in a cell. Contact the DA and recommend the filing of charges. Contact her Air Force superiors and recommend reprimand to the fullest extent possible, and basically anything and everything he can do within his power. It was one of the most messed up things I've seen during my relatively short experience in the legal world. Surely she belongs in jail for such repeated, extreme slander. When my parents got divorced, my dad had written in the divorce decree that my mother could not make any religious decisions for me, including regular church attendance, baptisms, etc. My mother was raised Mormon and my father was pretty adamant that I would not be raised in that religion too. As a lawyer who did a stint in high asset divorce law, this is pretty standard. I've written this clause into settlement agreements a lot. A father and his friend go to pick up his child for some time together. He rings the buzzer of the apartment. No reply. He phones too. No answer. This is odd. because he is there at the scheduled time, and the mother never misses an opportunity to claim that he doesn't care about spending time with his child and that he routinely misses scheduled times together. The father and the friend figure that's odd. Let's walk around back to the parking lot to see if her car is still here. They go around to the back to find the mother and child sneaking down the back stairs to leave the building. The child sees the father, yells hi. Daddy then turns to his mother and says, "See? I told you dad was coming to see me today." I was a clerk for a family court judge. We had a woman try to get an injunction to keep the father from taking the daughter on a trip to Disney World to play in a concert. It was sad. This is a true story and it happened in New Jersey. Guy getting a divorce becomes suspicious and insanely jealous that his separated wife is having an affair. He secretly follows her to a bar and waits outside in his car. She comes out many hours later in the dark and follows another car to a house. Husband follows her, staying back, and parks down the block. He gets out, sees the house her car is parked at, and goes around into the backyard. He's sneaking around looking in windows and finally opens a sliding glass door and enters the house. His wife and the guy she is with hear him moving around, lock the bedroom door, and call 911. He starts pounding on the bedroom door and shouting at his wife, and then the cops kick in the front door. The cops get everyone downstairs to sort this out. That is when the guy realized for the first time his wife was sleeping with his own divorce lawyer. The lawyer got in lots of trouble. Definitely one of the most entertaining ethical board decisions of all time. One of my uncle's ex-wives actually hired a hitman to kill my uncle so she could collect his life insurance. The hitman was actually an undercover cop. She did 4 years for the crime. If this gets any response, I'll tell a more in-depth version of the story. Some crazy crap happened. In all honesty, I've never heard of a hitman hired in the last 30 years that wasn't an undercover cop, or an informant, or a con that turned the client in. Maybe I haven't looked hard enough, but you'd think that the legitimate hitman market would be hit pretty hard from the trend of police in their ranks. Not a divorce lawyer, but my sister just went through a nasty divorce. It sounds like a movie you would see on Lifetime. They split up after 28 years of marriage because he fell in love with a lesbian stripper half his age. He emptied their savings and borrowed against their $401k so the lesbian could start her own lesbian bar, which was bankrupt after 6 months. There are many more sordid details which I'll go into if anyone is interested. First of all, my now ex-brother-in-law is the least likely guy to do something like this. Imagine Mr. Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver cheating on Mrs. Cleaver. Totally unexpected. My sister found text messages on his phone. The lesbian in question already had 2 children. Yes, I know, not a very good lesbian, and was pregnant at the time she met my bro-in-law. The lesbian would show up at his work approximately once a week and get a check even though she was not employed there. He bought her a car and rented a house for her for a year, paid in advance. Even when all of this came out, my sister wanted to reconcile. At the first counseling session, he gets up after 15 minutes and says something like "Nope, not gonna happen," and leaves. So her divorce lawyer requests financial documents from his business to decide alimony and child support. I forgot to mention they have 4 children together, the youngest of which is in college right now. Anyway, he didn't want to release any of the financial documents pertaining to this business, so my sis says, "Fine, I get the house and car and you get all the debt." He agreed to that, which makes me want to know what he's trying to hide by not releasing the documents. Anyway, the divorce was just finalized and my sister is devastated. This is the only man she's ever been with. They met in college and now 28 years later, nothing. The worst part is, if he asked her, I wouldn't be surprised if she took him back. I would lose all respect for her and do my best to talk her out of it. It was a real shock. I know that divorce is common, but not in my family. Mom and dad were married 49 years before mom passed and none of my numerous siblings went through a divorce. Big scandal. More sordid details are required to accompany my morning coffee while I pretend to work. I'm late to the party, but here goes. There's this rich couple that are suing a company for something or other. A guy on the jury is hanging out with a friend one afternoon, and his buddy starts telling him about this cougar he's banging. Supposedly she is a giant, controlling bee, but she spends a lot of her husband's money on him, so he puts up with it. Partway through the convo, he drops her first name, and the jury dude goes, "Wait, is her name friend?" replies, "Yeah, do you know her?" Turns out it's the rich lady from the case he is on. The next day he had to recuse himself from the case because he couldn't look at her the same way. The couple's lawyer demanded an explanation as to why he was dropping out in the middle of everything. So he had to tell the judge, the lawyer, the lady, and her husband. Awkward. Anyways, that case was put on hold for a long time because they had a divorce to get to. Oh, and I've been a piece of crap lurker for like a year and a half, and this is my first post, so yay. My parents had an amicable divorce, agreed fully that joint custody was the best option for my brothers and I, and spent 18 years living near each other so my brothers and I would not have any issues traveling between. They treated each other with respect and respected each other's rules. If I was grounded at mom's house, I was grounded at dad's house too. Her house, her rules, and you will respect them was dad's response one time when I was complaining about how unfair life was. They never spoke critically of the other in our presence, never attempted to use or indoctrinate us against the other. They were flexible with custody times for vacations and whatnot, and even jointly cooperated on major life celebrations such as graduation parties and my brother's wedding. All of which, to say the least, is apparently absolutely crazy behavior for divorced people. Also, I probably don't appreciate my parents enough. My two favorites from working in a legal office. 1. Husband and wife get divorced. Wife went into the marriage with her own house and 3 cars. Him with nothing. She mortgaged the house in her name, as the bank wouldn't give her anything if his name was on it too. To let husband start a trucking business, buys all his trucks for him and pays off the mortgage herself. He becomes successful. They divorce. She just wants enough money from him to square her mortgage. He can have the business and everything else. He sells everything to his friend for $10 next to nothing so that he's got nothing on his name and doesn't have to pay her squat. She's now going to lose the house. 2. Custody battle over 2 children. Father threatened the mother with a shotgun, cut her phone lines, got charged for assault on her. She flees town with the children. He demands she come back, and she agrees to visitation so the kids can see their father. During one visitation he punches her brother in the face at the changeover point and tries to steal the children. Visitation stops and he chucks a fit that she's stealing his children and she's lying about being afraid of me. I did nothing. The court psychologist signs off that he'd be an emotionally abusive sole parent. When the court says no to his demands that he get sole custody, he verbally abuses the judge, his lawyer, his barrister, the psychologist, and the independent children's lawyer, in front of the entire courtroom. He narrowly avoids arrest, and the whole time this case is going he's always yelling and screaming in the office that the court system is biased and only women get custody. It's a mummy's court, you're all sexist against men. etc. No, you're just a douche. 3. Man has wife and 3 kids, everything in his name. Finds a younger model, dumps her by text message, changes the locks, and goes into hiding. Wife has a chronic illness that means she can't work, and now she's stuck with 3 kids, and to rub it in he's changed all the bills and payments to her name, mother's address and mailed her nearly $10,000 worth of accounts, and no one can find him. He sells everything to his friend for $10 so that he's got nothing on his name and doesn't have to pay her squat. I don't know what the law is like where you are from, but that really doesn't work anywhere that I know. Such a sale would be voidable on multiple grounds, undervalued transaction and transaction to defeat creditors being the big ones. Let's see. 1. I've had a client come in to file divorce only to realize that the other party already obtained a divorce. He lied and never properly served her and she defaulted. Had to undo that one. 2. Put 3 fathers in jail for contempt. They had a sudden case of RAIDS, recently acquired income deficiency syndrome, and refused to pay support to their dependent spouses and or minor children. 3. Had a guy completely sandpaper key the finish of a brand new Maserati that was given to the wife pursuant to settlement agreement because he hated his ex so much. Also took off the tires. 4. Had a guy who funneled money over to his girlfriend, thinking he was slick hiding it from his wife. Girlfriend broke up with him and kept it. 5. Have a guy who got a $500,000 settlement, and so he prepaid all of his expenses up front for several years so he wouldn't have to pay up. 6. Had a guy put all of his properties in the name of business partners so as to put it beyond the court's reach, and thus the wife's reach. Had another guy claim he was unemployed but moved his paychecks to a friend's bank account. 7. Had to get ex-party orders to inventory safes when I knew people had cash-based businesses, and injunctions to freeze bank accounts, so forth. Sometimes by the time we got it, it was too late and money was removed. 8. Absentee dads, sorry to be gender specific, suddenly become fathers of the year. Now he attends parent-teacher conferences. Now he goes to doctor's visits and soccer practices. Never gave a dang before date of filing. 9. Men with midlife crises spending tons of cash on the girlfriend, vacations, jewelry etc. Yet cries poverty when it comes to alimony and long-term marriages where the wife was a stay-at-home for the past 35 years. 10. One guy faked a divorce decree from another country to avoid paying alimony. 11. Guy was adamant, to the point of tears, that he never had sex with that woman. Took DNA test, was the father. 12. People wanting extra visitation just so they can get a reduction in child support. Then once the case is concluded, they leave the children with a nanny even though the other spouse is home and willing to care for the kids. 13. Had a guy stage a break-in at my client's home, stole her personal computer and other relics, then presents us with photo evidence he obtained from the computer about our client's infidelity. I have seen it all, really. Had a guy who funneled money over to his girlfriend, thinking he was slick hiding it from his wife. Girlfriend broke up with him and kept it. Loved that one. I'm not a lawyer, but my parents divorced when I was 17 and it didn't finalize until I was 20. When I was a minor, my mom was saying I was living in another country with her when it was clear through school records I was not out of the country. She made up stories that my dad abused me and didn't feed me, when in 2 months of living with my dad I had a much better life than 16 horrible years with her after I turned 8. Well yeah, once you're 18 it's adult napping. Everyone knows that. My ex-husband and I got divorced after 4 years. We had no kids, we were still dirt poor. So we went to a divorce center, paid a couple $100, and did it ourselves. We are still friendly 3 years later. People we know genuinely think our friendly divorce is one of the weirdest divorces they have ever seen. I know I'm late, but this story is too good. When I was young, my parents had milk delivered to the house each week. It was a good deal. The milk was from a local coop, and the delivery routes were privately owned. The owner of our route got divorced and told us the story of his mediation. She and her lawyer had calculated the value of his milk delivery business to be $2.50 million, mind you. This was the mid-80s. She of course is seeking half that amount. His lawyer begins to balk that their estimate is unfair. It was probably legitimate when you calculated assets, inventory, balance, lack of debit, and revenue, and they would never agree to it, but he is cut short by his client. Our milkman then looks across the table and says something to the effect of, "I agree to your estimation. Go ahead and cut me a check." Everybody shows up at 6. You'll have to be there by 5 to have everything ready for them. He then tosses the work keys across the table as he sits back down. They eventually agreed upon a more reasonable number. Frick yeah, chicken milk, my favorite. I've worked on precisely 2 divorces. They were both awful. The first was just a terrible abusive situation, sadly too common, and not a good source for stories. The second, though, was a mid-40s, dink situation. Upper middle class engineers. Nobody was gonna go hungry at the end of it. Of course, we presumed it'd be a quick, painless negotiation. Nobody told us the husband was a raging alcoholic with no social skills. Nobody told us that the wife was very attached to the dog. We divided up the house, all possessions, the bank accounts, everything in under a week, except for possession of the dog. She was convinced he'd put the dog down. He kept saying it was man's best friend, not woman's. This case got slated for trial over who got the dog. I mean, that's downright extraordinary. That a divorce goes to trial at all is weird. That it goes to trial with no kids is weirder. That it goes to trial where both people are financially stable and well off is, like, comet hitting you unlikely. That it goes to trial solely over the possession of a dog is so far as I can tell from talking to other attorneys. Unheard of. So, pre-trial conference, and the judge is ripshit that any of this is going on. He orders a final attempt at mediation to begin after lunch. The husband sneaks away from his attorney to have a liquid lunch and comes back absolutely trashed. Starts yelling about how he's going to go home and kill the dog to deny her it. Tries to jump over the table, assaults a bailiff, runs out through an in-session court with the presiding judge on the bench. I never did find out how that one ended, as my internship ended before the case did, but I'll always remember it as the moment I decided that I didn't want to do family law. Fortunately for me, my current boss doesn't take those cases whatsoever. I had a batshit crazy client once involved in a dissolution of domestic partnership. Not married, but had been together 20 years. She had an insane amount of stories about the opposing party, drug dealer, he had killed a man, and all sorts of other wild accusations. No idea what was reality versus what she made up. They had millions between them and were fighting over every last Native American artifact, household item, etc. At one point she offered me gold nuggets as a gift because she liked me so much, which I had to ethically refuse as a non-de minimis gift from a current client. I eventually got off the case when I changed jobs. I think it's currently under appeal now, so I can't give any further detail, but there was some pretty crazy stuff involved in this case, including accusations that the opposing party was sleeping with his attorney, which shockingly had some basis in reality when investigated, but I got off the case right around then. When my parents got divorced, my mom told my dad she only wanted me and not my brother and sister. Dad laughed and said she should try that in court and see how the judge takes her only wanting one child while abandoning the others. My dad got full custody. She also stole all of the money from their shared account and left us for like 2 years while my dad had to beg and borrow money to feed us and pay bills after she drained the account. She didn't even show up for the hearing and the judge even asked if my dad wanted child support, which he declined, assuming collecting it from her would be more hassle than it was worth. My mom is a crappy human being. 16 years later and she hasn't changed a bit. I work with a woman who is a devout Christian. She met some guy from Nigeria online and fell in love. He was working as a Christian missionary in Singapore. She flew to Singapore. They got married and she helped him get US citizenship, etc. Eventually, she got pregnant and they had a daughter together. As soon as the girl was born, the father began getting her a passport and money together to take her to Africa so she could get circumcised. He eventually copped to marrying her solely to obtain US citizenship. She divorced him and was able to limit his supervised visitations to 1 hour per week due to his insistence on taking her to Africa to get the procedure done. He's still adamant to this day that his now 4-year-old daughter should have her clitoris clipped. I worked in divorce law for a bit more than a year, and then got the frick out. Some highlights of what I've seen. Guy cheats on wife with wife's best friend. Wife steals $6 million from his bank account and disappears. Guy gets multi-million-dollar inheritance. During divorce he spends it all on strippers. Literally the whole thing. Couple has over $5 million in assets. Spend over 3 years getting divorced. Couple has liquidated retirement and sold their house. Still not divorced. Lawyers have millions of dollars. This is largely the reason I'm done with this crap. Ethically I can see why you are done, but financially it was a terrible move based off bullet point 3. A couple of years ago my parents got a divorce. They're both very friendly people and they were always very cordial throughout the entire divorce process. In the end, the only thing they ever seriously argued over was who got to keep my pet rock from when I was in elementary school. They still argue over it to this day. That's really sweet actually. I'm not a lawyer, but I am in the process of getting a divorce. It's been quite messy, and that's without kids being involved. About 2 years ago my wife was cheating on me. Did not know until she filed for divorce. She actually does not even know that I know still. Anyways, March of last year she filed for divorce. We had been separated since April of 2012 for work reasons. We talked every day, saw each other on Skype and even visited each other on vacations twice in a 10-month period for 17 days each time. Overseas contract work. Nice pay, but time apart. The plan was to save up for 2 or 3 years and then buy another house and move into that. Anyways, after she filed I tried to kill myself a few times. Did not eat any food for over a month. I was so stressed that if I tried to eat I stupid eventually throw it up. I could not keep food down for more than an hour or two it seemed. Just water and the occasional binge drinking. We had all of our personal belongings in a storage unit. We were living in a 2,400 square foot house. It was full. We also had a few bank accounts. Now, I won't give an exact number but we had 6 figures saved up. Low 6 figures, but 6. During the divorce process everything was fine aside from me wishing I was dead. I had devoted nearly 7 years to her for nothing. We were coming to an agreement on who got what from our storage unit, and how much money each of us would get from the bank accounts, plus the division of the vehicles. It was looking pretty fair. She was getting a lot more than I was because I just wanted it done, so I was pretty much letting her pick out what she wanted. This was prior to court involvement. I had not even consulted an attorney myself even though she had one. Then just before we reached a deal in July of last year she went nuts. It was the 3rd of July while I was away at my family cabin. She drained all of the bank accounts. Every single penny was gone. She went to the storage unit and cleared all of the belongings out. Even my personal things like clothing, pictures, my important documents, medical records, everything I owned and had accumulated during my 28 years of life except for a bed, a desk and my computer with a few changes of clothes. She said I don't deserve anything since I want to be dead anyway and just took off. Had no idea it happened either until I got back from my cabin. It's still ongoing. We had court last month. It was hilarious. I hired a lawyer after she drained everything. She was breaking her own agreement. No assets were to be moved during divorce proceedings. My lawyer said he has never even heard of someone trying to disperse the amount of money she did, even with millionaire clients. I'm on the phone so I can't do too much for details, but that's what I got for now. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but my dad is a lawyer and he's divorced, so WTH. My dad was a real gem when he divorced my mom. He had my mom served while my sister was in the hospital with neuroblastoma. She had radiation and chemo and was in isolation because she had no immune system to speak of. The process server had to go to the children's hospital, go to the cancer ward, and break my sister's isolation seal to serve my mom the papers. The nurses had to escort him out. Also, it was Christmas Eve, and my mom's car was stolen that night after she had just moved out of his house and had it filled with all our stuff and Christmas presents. This one is so horrible I just don't believe it. Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh crap moment in court? Sat in on a personal injury case where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if he's ever treated a tibial fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, to which he only answers no. Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibula. After about 6-7 questions she asks, how did you get a medical license and have been able to practice medicine this long if you've never treated a tibial fracture, and begins a small rant about going after his credentials and those that gave it to him. To which he simply responds, there is no bone named the tibula. The lawyer became beet red and everyone in the room tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. I was representing a plaintiff in a hit and run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like, she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway and we had gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The oh crap moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged accident. I, thinking quickly, object because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel showed the picture to my client and asked her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say it was taken the day after the accident when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. Oh, crap. When I was in college, I was a bailiff. Guy is on trial for murder. First witness testified that she saw the defendant shoot the victim. Second witness states the same. Police officer testimony is that he arrived at the scene and defendant was there holding the gun. Coroner testimony is that the first bullet hit the victim in the arm, the second bullet hit the victim in the torso, and the third bullet hit the victim in the heart, which was the fatal shot. Defendant yells out, "See, that proves that I didn't kill him. I only shot the mother sucker twice." I was a baby lawyer in my first year representing the 19-year-old child of some rich people in San Mateo County, CA. My client had gone on a bit of a shoplifting spree and we were cleaning all her cases up with a global plea, meaning we handled them all at once. Being new, I filled out the plea form wrong, swapping the counts she was charged with for the counts she was pleading to. It's an easy mistake to make. Every court has their own unique form and I was unfamiliar with San Mateo's. The judge calls my line, starts reading off the plea form, notices the mistake and then starts screaming at the top of his lungs, "Counsel, what is this? What is this? Is this your first day on the job? This is a court of law and we do not accept mistakes. Fill this plea form out correctly or I will have you taken into custody for contempt." I did not expect a reaction like that. My client, who had clearly just taken a huge bong rip at 8 AM and who was wearing an all pink velvet tracksuit, was looking at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private he told me, "Sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The older guys will grumble and complain. But if you notice, they all fixed their own forms and we didn't have any more problems. Keeps the calendar running smooth." "Where did you go to law school?" After that he invited me into his office for coffee and gave me some really good life work advice. Turns out he likes talking to new lawyers. Represented a woman charged with multiple very serious felonies. She insisted that in the months before the offense, she'd been seriously dating one of the detectives who ultimately wound up investigating and testifying in her case. For a variety of reasons, I trusted this client and believed her, even though the detective never disclosed the relationship in his report. So, during his testimony, I asked Detective Smith, "You had a romantic relationship with Ms. Defendant, correct?" He goes, "What?" No one is visibly offended. The judge looks at me like I've lost my mind. The Commonwealth attorney audibly says, "What?" I'm freaking out because a large part of my cross and argument was focused on the bias formed by the prior relationship. And now I've got nothing and I've lost all credibility. I try again, "Detective Smith, have you had an intimate relationship with Ms. Defendant?" As the Commonwealth rises to object and the judge starts to scold me, the detective goes, "Oh, yay, we've had intercourse. It just wasn't very romantic." UK, bear with me on this one. I was in court listening to the most boring old defense lawyer you've ever seen. He was questioning the arresting officer in the case. It was drugs or something like that. Anyway, he's droning on about every little detail and the magistrate was constantly telling him to hurry along. The arresting officer was getting noticeably annoyed and the room became empty pretty quick. Everyone was very bored and annoyed. He was droning about details that I'm not sure anyone was really listening to or cared about. Anyway, he went over arrest times and the likes with the officer. Time he admitted the suspect and released him. He had bored the officer to the point where he was barely paying attention. So he was admitted in at 21:45 on the night in question? Yes. Comma, and released the night after? Yes. Comma, and that was what? Just after 10 PM? Yes. What time after 10? I don't know. 10:15 maybe. So my client was detained for more than 24 hours. Wait. The penny dropped. The officer let his guard down and had revealed he kept the defendant for more than 24 hours, which is the max time for detention in the UK. The defense rested and the magistrate threw the case out immediately. Well played, sir. Well played. I think this qualifies, though it wasn't me that was the lawyer. Got called for jury duty, was at the jury selection phase, and they asked if anyone here thinks they should not, blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like, "Oh, this ought to be good," and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said, "Okay, I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man which returned a guilty verdict." Lawyer's face went, "Oh crap." Commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yep, verified. Whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home. and they start over. I was interning for a judge. We were in the middle of voir dire for what was frankly not that exciting of a criminal case. Half-day trial expected, not salacious details or violence or anything. 75 potential jurors in the room. And when my judge didn't let a guy out of jury duty because he'd have to pick up his kids, that guy proceeded to say in front of everyone that if he was made to show up next week he'd make it the shortest trial ever and find him guilty right out of the gate. My judge was an incredibly even-keel guy. Nothing shook him or got to rise out of him. And he was an expert at figuring out what he wanted to say in the most neutral fashion possible before he said it. Conversations with him took forever because there was a pause before every sentence. But then, this guy poisons an entire jury pool of 75 people. We had to individually question each person to see if that little outburst was going to affect their impartiality, etc. 75 in-camera interviews later, judge pulls the guy back in front of everybody and begins to scream at him about disrespecting him, the courts, and every other juror's time. Me, the attorneys, and the court reporter go white-face because we didn't know this was coming. The guy didn't have to sit for jury duty, but I still don't know if he got to pick his kids up, since he spent a couple days in jail for contempt. I was involved in a pretty messy custody case. The other party was a mess and had kept the child from my client for a few weeks. OP was playing lots of stupid games and kept requesting continuances. I requested a drug test, which the judge ordered. However, the OP didn't show up for it. To clarify, he did show up. He just stood in front of the toilet for literally 2 hours and claimed he couldn't pee. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's drug use. So, opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, "You don't use H and crack, right?" That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons, especially considering his client didn't show up for his drug test. However, I fully expected the defendant to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause and the defendant said, "Yes, I do both of those drugs." My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. I genuinely don't understand how people are this stupid. Not mine, but my boss's one. She had to defend a small-time delinquent as duty solicitor. Before going to court, he asked her what he should do. She explained to him if he was cooperative and truthful, his sentence would be milder. After hearing the case, the judge asked him if he wanted to add something. He got up and explained to the judge, "My counsel told me to be truthful, so I wanted to tell you that I not only did the robbery I'm being heard for, but also several others in the region." He continued to admit to several robberies that had been unsolved yet, and everyone, even the state attorney, were facepalming. I suspect the truth did not set him free. Mine actually happened while I was sitting in the jury pool during voir dire. The case was a double homicide, and the jury pool filled the entire courtroom. If you're not familiar with voir dire, it is when the lawyers ask the potential jurors questions to determine who they want to sit on the jury and who they want to exclude. It is a long and boring process for almost everyone involved, but 9/10 it's the most important stage in a case. So the lawyers are asking us questions, and if that question applied to you, you raised your hand and they handed you a microphone to answer the question. The question asked was, do you or anyone you know have prior knowledge of this case? So this older gentleman raised his hand, is handed the mic, and proceeds to say, "Yeah, I work at a police station as a janitor, and I heard 2 detectives talking about him," points to defendant, "and they were saying he was about as guilty as sin." We all kind of stared open-mouthed at this guy, and I started chuckling because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Naturally, the defense attorney asked to approach the bench, followed quickly by the state prosecutor. After some quick and energetic whispering, the judge addressed the man. "Do you realize what you just did? You potentially poisoned this entire jury pool. I will be calling your boss and you will be hearing about this. You can count on that. You are dismissed, sir. But this isn't over." The man was escorted out, and then the judge addressed the remaining jury pool, which was still in a mostly packed room. Now I want you all to disregard what that man just said. I'm sure if any of you were ever accused of a crime like this, you would want a fair trial, and not be condemned based on the words of one old man. I have been in court many times since, but never have I seen that level of downright jaw-dropping absurdity again. Literally the first thing I ever did was just a law student intern. Guy has a legit defense on a drug possession case. Drugs found in a jacket. Guy wasn't wearing jacket. They were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with client. Explained everything. Client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing. Guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him. While wearing the jacket in question. The exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Not in court but at a tribunal. And also I was plaintiff. Suing for wrongful termination. My rep. So you terminated him because he was ill. Employer. Yes. Mr. And he was ill because he is disabled. Employer. Yes. Mr. So you fired someone for being disabled. Employer. Yes. Was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation, without giving details. He was right. The barrister starts to make our case, and I am taking note about areas we need to further explore when I hear, "Excuse me, why were you so rude to me?" The client, who had been told to not come, had come to court that day and was evidently incensed by the judge questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel first stunned and then trying to shut them up, before he adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Big sigh. Not me but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, "She can't prove it, I didn't leave a mark, thanks, buddy." Probably the funniest one I ever came across happened to a colleague. We were prosecutors then. 18-year-old defendant applying for bail. He needed a residential address and got his dad to show up at court to confirm that the family home was available to him. Defense lawyer gets old dad to confirm that son can stay at family home. Dad says yes. My fellow prosecutor gets up and asks dad, "Do you really want him home?" Dad goes off the deep end. Jesus. The grief he's brought me and his mother. Out all hours. Taking drugs. Hiding stolen property in the garage. All night parties. I'm on antidepressants and the wife's had a nervous breakdown. Dad goes off on one for 5 solid minutes. As the defendant gets taken back to the cells, he calls out, "Thanks dad. I owe you one." 2 moments in a DUI trial. 1. Passenger is testifying for driver's sobriety when the DA asks her, "You keep saying he was sober, but are you even tip certified?" A call for bartenders so they can recognize drunk patrons she was. 2. The head of the county's blood lab accidentally admitted he cranked the sensitivity of his machines way up because he was experimenting. Obligatory anal. But in a pre-mediation meeting once for an uninsured motorist claim an insured had alleged that she couldn't walk without the aid of a cane and had a pronounced limp after an accident due to a low back injury and a shooting pain in her right leg. The doctor notes didn't support anything but a subjective injury after a few weeks, but she was still treating 2 years later and going to new physicians. So, we had her followed covertly to see if she was really using the cane and had a limp, etc. We got footage of her carrying like 4 grocery bags in each arm to her car in a Walmart parking lot, walking perfectly fine. When she got to her car she even opened the trunk of her SUV without putting any bags down and lifted the gate with her knee partway. Her elderly mother was with her using a particularly decorative purple cane with a flower pattern on it. They followed her to a doctor appointment an hour later and she's on video using her mother's cane and walking with a limp that would give Forrest Gump a run for his money. Never did follow up on how that played in the mediation, but I can only imagine it gave some attorney an oh crap moment. Person I was representing was on trial for assault in the 3rd degree and DUI. In my state, A3 means you've assaulted an aid worker or police officer and is a felony. The allegations are that he was very verbally abusive to the officers and, at one point, kicked one in the face. We're sitting at the defendant's table and the officer is testifying about the statements my guy made to him, including some pretty horrific name calling. Out of nowhere, my client screams, "You're freaking liar, frick you son of a b." We lost the trial. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing. There was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie. We used to do it all the time. And that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased, and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I am sorry, Your Honor. I didn't know I couldn't do that. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me. I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time, and he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one I will never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded yes. Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said the truth. Now I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction, but according to my father, the judge audibly guffawed and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. Lawyers of Reddit, what was the least defendable case ever brought to you? I had a client who won just shy of a 7-figure settlement in a personal injury case. She then dropped into my office to ask me to file a fee dispute against the attorney who represented her in the personal injury action. That attorney took a little over $260,000 on this case. If you're doing the math at home, this guy took a 27% fee on the type of case where 40% fees are common. Did a freaking fantastic job because the woman got nearly $1 million. And then she turned around and tried to sue him to recover any of his fees. I rejected the case out of hand and then got an ethics complaint for discriminating against her. Sounds like she would have sued you for your fees if you had taken the case. A woman wanted me to sue her previous lawyer for charging her a lot of money but producing almost no work to justify his fees. She gave me what she told me was the lawyer's total work product, a page printed off the internet for which she said she was charged thousands of dollars for legal advice. She had already brought a claim via my jurisdiction's disciplinary body for lawyers. She had lost and wanted to bring an appeal. The judgment kept referring to documents that I hadn't seen. I pushed her to give me everything and she came in with multiple files full of immaculate legal work that totally justified the fees she was fighting. We told her to get lost, but she wasted a lot of my time before we realized she was full of crap. A friend of mine was in a case where a guy was accused for graffiti vandalism, among other things, and the conversation with the judge went like this. Judge, sir, did you make this graffiti? Defendant, no, I did not. J, but it has your signature at the end. D, yes, an artist has to sign his work. Case closed. Worked in-house for a famous character company with a large fan base. A few crazies a year call in. A guy called in claiming that we stole characters that he created and demanded to be compensated. I calmly asked them to provide more details so I can determine whether this has any merit to it. He states he designed the characters himself and gave it to the well-known actual creator when he was a kid, and the creator pawned them off as his own. I asked him when he was born, and it's a good 20 years after these characters were actually created. I ask him to explain this, and he pivots and says he also created some other well-known famous characters and brands. Characters and brands that are not owned by my company. I kindly ask that if he wants to pursue anything to send us something in writing and hang up. I figured if he wasn't going to do some really basic research on his own claim, he wasn't going to spend any time to write it up. Never heard from him again. This sounds like a guy I know that tried to claim that he created Toothless as a character 2 years after the first HTTYD movie came out. He also tried to tell me that he was an alien. I'm talking he 100% believed that himself and went on and on about how he was waiting for them to take him home. My dad had a client who was on trial for being a felon in possession of firearms, possession of stolen property, burglary, and distribution of narcotics. Guy had multiple pictures of himself on Facebook holding guns, drugs, and cash. and had videos of himself both breaking into someone's house and stealing a gun as well as selling crack on several occasions. Despite my dad basically telling the genius he was going to prison either way and to plead out for a reduced sentence, dude still pleaded not guilty. We still occasionally joke that the guy clearly wasn't competent to stand trial by virtue of being so dumb. I don't understand people's fascination for posting their crimes on Facebook. Morons. Not my client, but my dad, at the hospital he worked at, was sued by a gentleman after he saved his wife's life. Details. Patient is pregnant with 8th child and miscarries. The fetus is removed but the patient starts bleeding uncontrollably. The only option available is a hysterectomy. It was either that, or she dies right there on the table. My dad gets called in to do the surgery, performs it successfully. Hooray. The patient's husband is quite devout and beyond that his wife can't have any more kids. So he sued the hospital. No firm would represent him, and he ended up bringing proceedings himself. Went all the way to trial and he lost hard. Probably my client charged with statutory rape, multiple counts, who impregnated his high school sweetheart's daughter after having sex with said daughter from the ages of 13-15. He was 35 at the time of the birth. DNA in the form of a baby is strong evidence for the state. She lived on a large riverfront block. She had a jetty for a boat. A large tree fell over in storm and landed mostly in the water and making it difficult to moor her boat. She wanted to sue the government for not taking away her fallen tree. Not a lawyer. I was a jailer and used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured passed out behind the wheel parked on a sidewalk surrounded by a ludicrous amount of drugs and guns. His legal defense. He elected to represent himself because he wasn't done being stupid. Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, drugs, and felon in possession of a weapon because I've already been convicted all of those charges before. In short, during his jury trial he admitted to doing it but explained with a smug grin that since he had already done time for the same charges from another case before that he could not be prosecuted for them ever again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's in prison for 20 years now. If he'd taken legal counsel he could have easily cut a deal for 5. I represented a tree trimming company that went to the wrong address and cut down all the mature trees in that yard. The right address was 100 North XXXX Street, and the company went to 100 South XXXX Street and just went straight at it, hacking away. I still have no idea why the insurance company didn't just settle that one pursuit. Our legal advice is salivating. Not me but my dad's lawyer. My dad's ex-wife decided that they weren't getting on with divorce proceedings fast enough and decided to make a move while my dad was at work and we were all at school. So she locked my little brother in my room, the only one they didn't touch, and called over 40 plus people to take whatever she thought was hers. So pretty much everything, including furniture, old music and pictures from before she was even around. I show up to the house to pick up my little brother and it's empty. I don't know what she thought was gonna happen when she possessed many things that were obviously my dad's, like pictures of just me and him, or the computer that he bought through his job at Dell. My dad sued her 3 times and won every time. She just got caught laundering money from the summer camp she worked at and my old Boy Scout troop that her son was now in. Frick her. Interestingly enough, my dad just remarried to a district attorney. Dad in his 60s hadn't been paying child support for decades and he owed more than $60K for 2 kids who were adults now. He was basically living at a farm in the middle of nowhere so no one could find him. He worked for cash so the money could not be garnished from anywhere. He then came into an inheritance, which was deposited in his bank account and promptly confiscated by family maintenance. He wanted it back. Yes, well, we all have wants, Simon. A lady was sacked by a large company. They had caught her embezzling money to fund a gambling habit. They had clear evidence the embezzling had occurred, and she did not deny it. She sued the company for $300,000 for unfair dismissal. My sister's firm represented the company against this woman. The case was so easy, the firm gave it to my sister as her first ever solo attempt. My sister screwed it up badly. Not only did she lose, the court awarded the woman $500,000 instead of the $300,000 she asked for. In the end it was a good career move. The partners all knew her name and dropped into her office, one by one, to offer their sympathy. Worked in family law in California for like 2 years before deciding I'd hang myself if I didn't change career paths. In CA, the obligation to pay spousal support, alimony, ends when the recipient begins cohabitation with a new romantic partner. A guy who was positively getting flicked in half in his monthly payments came to the office and said he was aware of the rule about cohabitation and wanted me to argue his point in court. You see, his ex was a narcissist she was in love with and had begun cohabitation with herself. Her presence in her apartment should count the same as if there were a romantic partner there. He was bordering on begging me to take his money. I refused. Not a lawyer, but I feel bad for YNW Melly's lawyer. Dude wrote 3 songs about murdering someone, murdered 2 people in his vehicle, drove them to the hospital and said it was a drive-by. The shell casings of the bullets were in his car. Cell phone GPS pings him at the murder scene. He said he'd murder them in text messages and the dude pleads not guilty. I imagine that if you take a job like that you probably have to disconnect emotionally and just play the part, as if it were a speech and debate exercise. Then, after your client of course loses, you go cash your paycheck. A lady didn't pay her general contractor upwards of $20k after the job was finished because of a dozen or so minor complaints, like he was slow. Told her she should pay and we could help her with her complaints, else he will probably be successful getting a lien on her home. She didn't pay. He got a lien on her home, even offered to help her stash the funds in escrow pending their dispute, and would prevent a lien in the meantime. Nope. My best guess is that she didn't have the money and was attempting a tantrum to get out of it. This was my 1L internship, literally the first person to ever approach me in a legal capacity. Later that fall, she showed up to my school and was demanding my info from the front office, who handled it well and I never saw her. She blames me for losing her home. I told you to pay or you'd lose your home. You didn't pay and lost your home. Surprise Pikachu face. My brother's a lawyer. His client took a backhoe, dug up a standalone ATM and scooped it onto a flatbed truck. Then, and only then, noticed a security camera nearby filming everything. He got some black spray paint out of his truck, went up 2 inches away, really nice view of his face, and sprayed the camera lens. He insisted on pleading not guilty. This demonstrates the importance of coming up with a complete project plan at the start rather than winging it. It's much easier to fix these things in PowerPoint than it is later on. I read a patent and told my bosses it was both invalid and infringed by no one. It had 10 means for elements and each patent claimed that no one would practice, or that weren't supported in the written description. Partners, my bosses, new to patent litigation, sued on the patent anyway using young, inexperienced, unseasoned attorneys in the firm. 3 years later, after billing the client millions of dollars, every defendant won by proving each claim either not infringed or invalid. Then my employer appealed and billed the client another load of money, with a young attorney in charge of the appeal that didn't understand the underlying issues on any level because he was a former teacher instead of patent attorney. It was such a bad patent no one would settle at any point in the case. My bosses were blood-sucking trolls. I quit for these and similar, parallel reasons. The firm finally imploded. Not a lawyer, but I am a trades union representative. At the last company I worked, we had a great set of workers. My colleague was the head representative for the union at the time, whereas I was still learning to be a representative. Anyway, we had this electrician who'd worked at the company for 25+ years. Really well respected, but his views are a little out there. My colleague had just got him back to work after a case of inappropriate workplace behavior, kissing an office member of staff on the cheek, where he was suspended for 6 months whilst investigations went ahead. He came back with a final written warning, meaning one more incident and he was sacked. All his pension, benefits, gone. 2 days after he came back, me and my colleague got asked to come into a meeting regarding this employee. Got in the meeting. Senior HR and the boss of the company are sat inside. They lay out new allegations. So we have had a report that when working in a property, you went into the house when there was only a 14-year-old girl and then proceeded to talk to her about sex. condoms and other obscene matters we won't mention. So we're just like whoa wait, what the heck, we need to talk to our colleague and find out what's happened here and give him advice. Nope. Before we even had a chance to do that, the guy spoke up and went, yeah I did. Nothing wrong with that. She's 14. She knows how to use a condom. She's from the area. That's all they know how to do. They have sex and get pregnant by 16. So I'm just talking to her about what she knows. Dude was in his late 50s, he should know better. Both me and my colleague just stunned like why the frick did he just say that? Anyway, he got suspended and asked us to defend him because he says he did nothing wrong. We got the case file and evidence through, realized that there was actually frick all we could do. He dug his grave, dug it a day after he returned to work. He lost everything. His house, pension, everything. No one would employ him as he was deemed too risky to take on, knowing they could have a potential sex scandal should he do it again. I'm a paralegal. Local guy in his 20s decides to go rob his dealer. He got the wrong apartment. When the college girl opened the door, he shot her in the face and fled. She lay there for hours just out of reach of her cell phone and listened to it ring while her mom called. She lived. A neighbor found her. Now she's paralyzed from the neck down and her face is very deformed. This is a small town. During the trial, the jury was shown just how strung out on drugs he was and how he even bragged to a few friends that he shot someone. That's pretty dang hard to defend. He got 40-something years. The girl that drove him to and from the apartment was also given jail time. That poor freaking woman. I can't help but think about the fact that she has to live with knowing that her life has been completely destroyed because of something that she had nothing at all to do with. I would be bitter as all heck. It's like a 100-way tie for first place. Spoiler alert. They had the drugs on them. Less frequently, it was a gun. And yeah, let's just say the I have a permit defense for the latter was not something we had to worry about round those parts. You'll be surprised how quickly cases become at least theoretically defensible as soon as you establish any distance whatsoever between the client and the contraband. Though, in fact, I'd say there's a systematic bias in juries and lots of inconsistency in the relevant case law about how difficult it is, and or ought to be, to prove possession beyond a reasonable doubt. It errs, of course, in favor of the prosecution. Guy wanted me to sue the city because the city took too long to bust his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. Guy claimed his neighbor's house had mice because of the garbage truck that was parked there when it wasn't hauling garbage. He said the neighbor's mice were causing his house to have mice, reducing the value of his house so he couldn't sell it. I asked him how long he had been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't trying to sell it yet. I asked him what he had done about the mice so far. He said he called the city to have them get rid of the mice, but the city refused. I asked when he reported the neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He told me he never reported it. The city just towed the garbage truck after the neighbor was arrested for some unrelated crime, DUI. I asked the guy how he knew all this, and he said the neighbor and him were partners in the illegal garbage disposal business and his neighbor's old lady told him about the arrest and the towed garbage truck. An independent mortgage broker from a small town on the East Coast. One day, he just up and left without notifying his clients. Fast forward a few months later and one of his former clients discovers significant mistakes in her residential mortgage paperwork that caused massive issues with the bank, costing thousands in legal fees to rectify. Naturally, she wants to recover damages. Only the broker can't be found. Office is boarded up for non-payment of rent. His house is up for sale, and nobody knows where he went. The only indication of his whereabouts was his Facebook profile. He was swimming with dolphins somewhere sunny with his teenage daughter, which infuriated the plaintiff. Fortunately, he paid his insurance up front and it hadn't expired, so he would be defended by us through the insurer. When I finally got in touch with him after 2 months, he explained that he'd lost all interest in the profession about a year ago. Since then he took on clients or helped existing ones, but with basically zero financial background checks and absolutely no regard for the structure or timing of the transaction. He was rubber stamping everyone and everything. His work was so shoddy and his file management so poor that we had basically nothing to go on. He was dead to rights, and he didn't care at all. Then one day he declared bankruptcy, signed the house over to a trustee, and got a short-term visa to live in Australia where his daughter was studying. We settled that one quickly as he had no intention of returning for trial, and we'd probably never be paid. We once had a client skip bail and run. I looked him up on FB and he had posted a photo of the bond paperwork and a bunch of $20 bills. The post reads something like, "Man, frick the law and my bondsman. Can't nobody tell me crap. Blah blah. Typical hood crap. We live in BFE, Texas. Dude is not a gangster." Anyways, he didn't realize that the only reason we bonded him was because we were going to represent him. Withdrew on the bond in the case. In the motion to withdraw, we quoted his FB post and attached a copy of it as Exhibit A when we filed it. Not a lawyer, but I was a witness to an assault a few years back. Had to get up in the box and be questioned. Terrifying. Anyway, it was on a night out, hanging around outside a club. A female friend of mine took exception to some dude grabbing her butt. Both start slinging insults at each other until the guy decides to sling his fist at her face instead. Right in the presence of 3 police officers, who witnessed the whole thing and arrested him immediately. The guy for some reason denied it all, despite being caught literally red-handed by the popo, and it had to be resolved in court. How would you even argue on his behalf? I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. Plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. Plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have aborted. A quick look at medical records shows that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to her local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities, and she returned to that same ED a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doc did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress, but he did not do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from, not do an organ scan like an OB would. But she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail, but she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy, so he didn't do an ultrasound at all. But she sued whoever provides that healthcare, the jail, maybe. Just a sad case that the hospital won handily. The real loser is that poor kid . I represent condo and homeowners associations. One of my condo association clients wanted to evict some tenants because they were fat. I am not even joking. Now, the law does, in some cases, allow the association to evict non-owner tenants. This is very fact specific. However, I spent a long time trying to elicit from my client exactly what these tenants were doing that warranted eviction. Client: well, they are just disgusting people. They are fat. Penge 1028. Exasperated: you can't evict someone because they're fat. We did not end up filing suit. I got sued for $50,000 by a man who claimed his arm was broken when he sideswiped my car at 2 AM. We both got a DUI, and he was also cited for going the wrong way on the freeway. My attorney determined that the guy had been to the doctor the day before the accident and had received treatments to his broken arm. He was charged with filing a false police report and some other charges. Ended up doing 90 days in county lockup. I paid my fine, did the required procedure to get my license back, and learned my lesson. Obligatory: not a lawyer, but my dad was. My dad was a patent and trademark attorney about 10 years ago and worked for a pharmaceutical company. The owner of the company adopted the slogan "Just do it," not knowing that the trademark belonged to Nike. When the owner found out that the trademark belonged to one of the biggest companies in the world, rather than change the slogan and avoid a lawsuit, he calls up Nike and expresses how funny he thinks it is that they have the same slogan. My dad got them to settle the case and the catchphrase was later changed. I had a guy want to sue a popular chain restaurant because he had a heart attack there. Couldn't say what the restaurant did wrong, but it was clearly their fault since it happened in their restaurant. No thanks. Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable commodities. They can be transferred from one person to another, which is often easier than convincing a municipality to issue you a new one for your new bar restaurant. My client was opening up a new restaurant and found some wackadoo who had a liquor license that he was not using. I believe his bar previously folded. He agreed to sell his license to my client for about $250,000. The contract had a minor notice provision. Something like you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer dropped the ball and sent it in 10 days. Now, the wackadoo received full payment but decided that because this minor notice provision was breached, he was entitled to keep both the license and the money. There is a doctrine of law called material breach of contract, which, in a nutshell, means you can only sue for breach of contract if the breach materially impacts your contract rights. For example, if my client had failed to pay for the license, that would be a material breach of contract. But getting a notice document 3 days late, when full payment had already been made, yes, it is a technical breach of the contract, but no court in the United States of America would deem that to be a material breach, and certainly no court will let the wackadoo keep the license and the money. So we sued the wackadoo, who represented himself. He fought okay for a pro se, but the judge of course ruled against him because his position was crazy. Wackadoo kept the money and my client got the license. I'm not a lawyer, but my mother was in a lawsuit against her roommate and the roommate lost horribly. My mother, the nice and kind woman that she was, heard a family member's mother was going to be homeless. She was a bit crazy, which later turns to really crazy, and wasn't allowed to be on the premises of her daughter's apartment complex for legal reasons. She takes her and gives her the spare room. My mother worked as a hospice worker and stayed 4 nights a week at her client's home. She told her new roommate, who had nothing but a verbal consent to stay in her home, so no legal paperwork, no bills under her name, nothing but whatever random mail was sent to the roommate, was told that she could stay, live there rent and bill free as long as she cared for the pets and house while my mom worked. This lady had changed locks, done hard drugs, booby-trapped the house, stole items. The list goes on, but I'll cut it here to save a read. Well, my mother tells her she needs to leave and gives her over a month's notice to vacate her property. She did not, and after dozens of 911 calls and a legal notice to vacate after several trips to the local sheriff's office for help, as the roommate had squatters' rights, we managed to get her out and move on to court, as she had assaulted several of us between telling her to leave and her leaving. She represents herself and my mother. Myself and my then girlfriend with my mother's lawyer arrive. The lady was offered first speaking and she tried to lay out this massive defense. I have a copy of the lease, as well as several other documents making it illegal to remove me from this home. As well, I want to file charges against them for B&E, as well as verbal assault. The judge looks to us and we give them our statements, as well as all the videos we had recorded of us entering and company fronting the woman on this issue, and she was the only one screaming, cursing, and so on. As well, my mother and I, along with the home's actual owner, provide the actual lease. I signed on as a co-signer, though I did not live in the house, and all of which failed to have the roommate's signature on it. The charges on us were dropped almost immediately. She was charged with squatting, forging of legal documents, slander, and a few others I can't recall offhand. We were granted restraining orders against her. As well, she had to pay all the fines of the court and spend just over a year in jail. Sorry for a long one, but I hope someone enjoyed reading this. Divorce attorneys of Reddit. What was the most stupid reason 2 people wanted to divorce? Kid got 1 elephant ride too many. Mom and dad agreed before dad took daughter to circus that 1 elephant ride should be plenty. Mom later finds out that dad let daughter have 2, not 1, as agreed, but 2 elephant rides. As mom would describe it, he's doubling down again, trying to get her to hate me. I know it. Why the heck else is someone letting their kid ride an elephant halfway around the whole dang town? Everybody knows now. Not a divorce attorney, but there was a case in Kuwait where a woman wanted to divorce her husband because he eats hummus with a fork. A valid reason. She saw a picture of him contra dancing he'd posted on Facebook. She knew he went contra dancing. That part wasn't the surprise. In fact, I'm still confused about this one. Maybe she just wanted a divorce but didn't have the guts to actually admit she wanted one. So she just blamed some stupid thing he did instead of actually assuming the guilt and fault of initiating a divorce. Not an attorney, but my mom is a paralegal. There was one case that kept dragging along because they were fighting over the luggage. Once that was settled, they started arguing over a $25 plastic palm tree. That palm tree prompted the case to go into mediation, costing both of them around $1,000 each just for the mediation. Isn't that the point where both attorneys get together and they buy each other's clients a tiny plastic palm tree as a thank you? My friend's parents divorced because his mother wanted a horse. His father argued that they can't keep a horse in a 6th floor apartment and don't have enough resources or money to rent a stable. Then she fricked her son's math teacher and became a C-kid. I feel sorry for everyone involved. I feel like the horse had very little to do with this story. I have a friend who used to be a security guard at a courthouse. He said one time he had to watch over a divorce proceeding between a 80-year-old man and his 40-year-old Vietnam wife. She said, in broken English, she wanted to divorce him because he couldn't satisfy her anymore. During the beginning of the case she would yell mean things about this guy and the judge had to constantly tell her to be quiet. The old man never said a word. Eventually the judge said we will have to continue on a future date. She immediately said then forget it, got up and walked out of the courtroom. There really should be no reason required for a divorce. Pay a fee, split up the assets and be on your way. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but a lawyer I know got a case because the husband didn't change his Facebook status to married quickly enough after the wedding. It was like 2 weeks. The judge laughed at the lady and made them get marriage counseling. Lawyer pocketed north of $1,000 for that. My ex's boyfriend, never married, mom told me that at his wedding to his now ex-wife he didn't introduce her immediately as his wife, so she flipped the heck out and started berating him in front of their guests. Marriage lasted less than 1 year. Don't get me wrong, he isn't a shat, but yikes. Maybe not be hateful to the person you just pledged to spend your life with. A much older woman, who had been married for a very long time, told me that one morning over breakfast, out of the blue, she had a burning desire to pick up her butter knife and stab her husband to death. She took that as a sign that maybe their relationship was toxic. Pretty solid reason for ending it. No, but my dad stated in court that he was divorcing my mom because she was always asking him to take out the trash or mow the lawn or calling him at work to ask him to pick up milk. You know, adult stuff like maintaining a home and family. A lawyer turned to her and just said, "You're dodging a bullet here. Someday you'll be glad he left." Turned out he was cheating on her. My mom made a very good life for herself. At 71 years old she can afford a house cleaning service and pays someone to maintain her lawn. Calm as a bee. Row. So back in the pre-iPhone era, there was a newly married couple in my apartment building. Maybe 3-4 months in, I come home and hear them fighting about what the exact time is. Like one was saying it's 8:15 and the other was like no it's 8:13. So the next day the guy just walked out and I never saw him again. Later I found out they got divorced over some silly fight. Silly. The clock reads 8:13. That 2 minutes is the difference of getting a coffee before work or not. Not a lawyer but my own personal experience. I was married for 11 years and my ex-husband wanted the divorce. He said, "I don't want to lower my standards for you." He didn't want to do anything legal so I would be forced to stay at home and continue to do things normally. He just wanted to see other women and still have a stay-at-home mom. I had to file for divorce and he fought everything because he didn't want to pay up. He wanted the divorce, and even though I was filing for it, he didn't want to give up what he was ordered to give. He wanted me to agree that I didn't have any rights to the assets and money because I was a SMOM for 6 years. It's been about a year and a half. Now I am in school full time, work 2 jobs, I'm a single mom, yet somehow life is easier without him here. He gave me a blessing I didn't even know I wanted. Sounds like my parents' divorce except my father was gay, but he still wanted a SAHW for show and to do all his errands and cooking and cleaning and childcare for him. When they finally divorced because she was over it, he was greedy and tried to cheat her out of her fair share. I know this isn't the reason for the divorce, sorry, but it made me wonder what precipitated the divorce since it was so paranoid. My sister worked for a divorce attorney, and she had to field a couple of phone calls from a guy in the midst of a messy divorce. He insisted that his ex was putting rocks on his lawn to mess with the lawnmower, and he was trying to somehow add that to the divorce proceedings. When I was younger my parents dumped rocks on the lawn to kill the grass. It didn't work. I was expected to mow the lawn. I'm not a divorce attorney, but my former subordinate got divorced over Pokemon cards. At one point during the separation she came to work to accuse him of stealing some of her heirs. It got near physical and we had to have security forces remove the spouse so we could get back to work. They were a hot mess. Been married for 4 years. Finally had the big talk with one another. You know, the one where we realize it is forbidden to combine our card collections. Not a divorce attorney or anything, but when I was kid, a 15-year-old girl wanted to get married to a 20-year-old guy. Because of her age she needed her parents. So she begged and pleaded with her parents, who eventually allowed it for when she turned 16. But the guy divorced her after 4 years because she refused to have sex or even kiss, like it never occurred to her sex was involved. I suppose this is more of a reflection of the sex education she received. Wonder why the parents just didn't file a restraining order against him. A guy I used to work with said his wife divorced him because she claimed God spoke to her and told her he wanted her to move the French Riviera to be wined and dined by wealthy men. Because apparently God encourages casual hookups and wealthy men in the Riviera are lining up to sleep with 40-something mothers of 4. Not a divorce or a lawyer, but my ex years ago left me because I wanted chickens in the front yard. The conversation was something along the lines of how our futures just didn't line up. Turns out he was cheating, but you know, blame it on the dang free-range hens. It became a cherished phrase almost immediately. I'm not a divorce attorney, but I once worked with this dude that was like 19 years old. Seemed a bit young to be married. Then he said she was his second wife. He said he divorced his first wife because she kept grinding the gears in his car. Maybe the most reasonable divorce ever. My grandmother was stepping down into their fishing boat. My grandfather was already in the boat. He was holding the pier to stabilize the boat. A rogue wave came, pushed the boat violently away from the pier, and grandma nearly fell into the water. She accused him of intentionally trying to embarrass her. They barely spoke for 3 months. My grandfather refused to divorce because we're Catholic, but offered to live apart. I was about 10 years old, living with them during this time. Talk about a crash course in small talk. In Italy apparently you can save on taxes when buying first house for your own living. If you married it counts as one for the couple. Some people are getting divorced when buying another house to save on taxes again. If it was true, it wouldn't be a stupid reason if you could save thousands on taxes this way. I was cohabitating with and engaged to a guy, and we broke up after a week-long beach house vacation with my family because I beat him in front of everyone else playing Scrabble. He was a doctor with a huge ego and said that I was supposed to let him win to make him look good. After a week of the silent treatment, when we got home, he moved out. That's okay. He was a gambling addict as well, and that was bothering me. So I was sort of pushing his buttons, I think. He wasn't as angry when I confronted him about his gambling problem. So it's funny to me that the last straw was Scrabble. I knew a couple who married super early and divorced so he could join the Naval Academy. Apparently you can't enter if you're married. They stayed together and remarried after he graduated. This seems like one of the least stupid reasons for a divorce. Good on them for having such a strong and understanding relationship. And thank you for sharing such an interesting tale. The wife got tired of being married to a transplant surgeon and wanted to be an S&MH. And yes, it turns out she had mental problems. Surgeon in residency here, neuro, but still. Surgeon lifestyle is really prone to divorce. You either marry somebody who's really invested in your career or you out of luck. Dealing with somebody so absent is not easy. An elderly friend of mine divorced his wife so she would qualify for Medicaid and could afford her treatment for a terminal illness. They'd been married 40 years and he had strong religious values about the sanctity of marriage. The state caseworker even visited the house to make sure he wasn't living there. In her last difficult days, our stupid greedy medical system was forcing them apart. He died broken-hearted and penniless not long after she passed. Every dime he had worked his lifetime to save either went to her medical bills or the unnecessary expense of keeping 2 households to get health insurance. Some people in the US choose never to get married for similar reasons. They'd lose their health insurance or their disability payments would be reduced. Stupid that it had to happen, but technically a good reason. My mom, who worked for our state's welfare agency for 35 years, convinced her brother and sister-in-law to get divorced. They were both my mom's best friends. My mom and her bro were Irish twins, and my aunt and uncle were in love until the day my uncle died. But my uncle worked in construction and had no savings, and so, when he got sick, he and my unemployed aunt had no income. This was my aunt's second marriage, and her first husband, a teacher, never remarried and eventually passed away. In my state, even if you divorce your spouse, you can take their social security when they die. If 1, you have none, and 2, there are no other legitimate claims. She was a stay-at-home parent and never earned income, so she had no social security, and my uncle put almost nothing into the fund, so his monthly checks were pitiful. So, they divorced. She petitioned for her first husband's SS, got it, and then they got remarried. To this day, even though my uncle is now deceased, we are forbidden from mentioning to her kids that her and my uncle were divorced for a few months. How about the most stupid reason not to divorce? A good buddy of mine married a woman who almost immediately after the wedding developed back problems. Back problems that required her to quit her job as a florist. For the last, no kidding, almost 28 years, he's lived alone in a studio apartment so she can live in a 4-bedroom house. The reason he refuses to divorce her is because of her medical condition and his job. Cop gives her golden level coverage. He also mumbles stuff about their 2 kids, but they're college bound now. He also forced himself to do the last 10 years he's retiring from his department is spring at 30 years, because at 30 years, his contract gives him and his spouse 100% medical coverage for life. He hates his life. I hate it. And her. For him. Bonus. Her boyfriend, who makes some nice bucks, lives with her in the house my buddy is paying for. That is so sad. What a nightmare for him. I really hope he finds some happiness. A couple in Australia threatened to divorce if gay marriage became legal, but surprise surprise, when it eventually became legal they didn't go through with it. They clearly had no idea what they were talking about too. They wanted to simply end their legal marriage, but to get divorce in Australia you have to separate for 6 months, live at different addresses, etc. I know a couple that wanted a divorce after 35 years because one of them were not happy with who their son was dating. People, man. Proof that even time can't heal stupidity. A friend is dating someone with divorced parents for a similar reason. The mum would lay down ridiculously high standards for their kids' partners and was driving the kids away. The dad wanted a good relationship with his kids so left her. I don't think it's a particularly stupid reason for divorce, tbh. If the reason told was stupid, most likely happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back and there were more serious underlying issues. I think you underestimate the ingenuity of stupid. Not a lawyer, but my dad's friend got divorced because they couldn't agree on what kind of house to buy. He wanted one with an apartment so they can have extra income, and she didn't want some stranger living in her house, so they split up over it. I don't think that's a stupid reason. It's a big enough disagreement that inability to work things out and see the other person's side doesn't bode well. The couple had a 7-year-old child and the mom was some crazy anti-vax crazy vegan. The dad gave the child a 6-piece McDonald's chicken nugget for his birthday and the mom went insane. She wanted full custody over the kid but didn't get it, thankfully. Weird Al Yankovic got divorced when his wife joined the Columbia Record Club. He couldn't handle that kind of commitment. That's just the way things go. Cher lasted just a bit over a week with Greg Allman before she filed for divorce. Eventually reconciled, but in the end they divorced. She filed because of his drug addiction, something she should have had insight about if she had taken the time to actually get to know who he was before making the decision to marry. Instead she married him after just over 3 days of being divorced to Sonny Bono. Imagine that. Rich people led different lives. Not a lawyer, and indirectly the cause. My friend and I were competitive and always tried to mess with each other while competing. One time, while we were drinking, I don't remember what we were doing, but I said to him, "I fricked your sister." His sister's husband heard me say that and confronted her about it. This led to a huge argument and eventually their divorce. The guy was in butthole and she is significantly happier now without him. My friend's parents got divorced because his mother thought his father had superpowers and was a superhero but didn't want to help the world. Not a lawyer, but my uncle once got a marriage annulled because she got mad at him for getting a sunburn on the honeymoon. Dude's probably 98% Irish with the pastiest skin you've ever seen, and she expected him to not get a sunburn? Not an attorney, and not a reason, but still a stupid thing involving a divorce. When I was volunteering at an animal shelter, there was one dog who was there simply because his owners got divorced and couldn't agree on who should get the dog, so they abandoned him in the, thankfully no kill, shelter instead. Poor dog was so big, he barely fit in the small kennel. His bedding was just blankets on the floor because he was too big for the usual dog cot's beds. If he stood with his back to the wall, his front almost reached the kennel's gate. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I hope he found a forever home with nice humans and a lot of space. Not a lawyer here, but the stories I've seen of people being forced to consider divorce to afford medical bills even though they still love each other are pretty dang stupid in a very different way than you were thinking when you wrote this question, I think. Not a divorce lawyer, or practitioner of law defense of any kind, but boy have I got a story to share. My cousin, well, she's got a problem in that she can't seem to be happy being single and has an intense desire for that fairy tale happily married life. A few years back, she starts talking with this Mormon bloke and claims to be in love with him. Has met him lots of times, spends hours on video calls with him and the like. After a few months, he proposes, and she sorts out her first passport, leaves her son with an ex-boyfriend. He was as close as being this kid's dad as possible, and swears up and down to the rest of her family that she isn't going to get married. First time outside the country, possibly first time she ever met this guy. She lies to us about this crap a lot, and she gets married. Before this, she converts to Mormonism and tells us how she feels so connected to them, which she hasn't felt for so long. She never goes out, so kind of hard to feel connected, but still drinks wine and smokes. She spends a while talking about being happily married and how she imagines her dad would be so happy for her. Spoiler alert, he wouldn't be. He hated religion and Americans, and this guy was super religious and a Yank. He'd be rolling in his grave. About a year later, she's in the process of getting the unconsummated marriage annulled. Straight up annulled. No divorce, just throwing the dang thing away. There was also the time she got catfished. One of the pictures featured on gay blogs for years and was of a bodybuilder that was actually fairly local and married with a kid. She claimed to have seen that guy, who was a former soldier, firefighter, and a model. He did have a connection to the fire service, but he was far from a sculpted Adonis he pretended to be. I think she still spoke with him for a while. Although my brother had stupid reasons, my mom almost going to the police takes the cake, so long story as short as I can make it goes. My bro started cheating with a 20-year-old that worked for him. He was about 40 at the time. She may have been as young as 17-18. Sister-in-law catches him not once but twice. They separate and he moves out. My brother's reasoning for straying was because she was mean to him and yelled at him twice. The first instance was like 10 years ago and the second was after he was already cheating, so the best part of the story, he needed someone to watch the kids on his days and he had to work. My sister-in-law had to approve the person. He asked my narcissistic mother, who is one of those that will not change her routine or life for anything. Set in het ways, she not only refused but she threatened to go to the police and say sister-in-law was blackmailing her to watch the kids. Not because they were going to keep her from the kids. No, because they wanted her to watch them and get paid. Of all the dumb things my mom thinks this definitely up there. I wish we would have pushed her to go to the police just to see and hear their reaction to her blackmail claim. There's not really a good answer to your question. I've had tons of clients who got divorced over all sorts of fricked up and really good reasons. I haven't had one where the reason given was just absolutely petty and pointless. It's an expensive, very public, and drawn out process. Almost no one gets divorced on a whim. Not personal, but a friend. This couple, probably about 27 years old, each, went into his office crying. He said it looked like they were crying for hours, so he decided to take them in and hear the case and whatever. Apparently, the woman, who was still crying, had asked the man to buy her cookie dough so they could make cookies for her friends' get-together. The woman said he bought cookies instead from the grocery store bakery, and she flipped out on him for not caring about what she wants. The man filed for divorce the day of. Used to work in family law as paralegal during the 50 Shades of Grey hype. She wanted too much sex. He wanted out of the marriage. The judge literally called the lawyers to the bench and asked if this was real. They had been married for 20 plus years, very successful couple who were now trying to split millions in assets and business ventures. So out of curiosity, I binge watched all 3 movies after the last one came out. I wanted that time of my life back, but I saw nothing horribly wrong with it. It is forever dubbed the 50 Shades case. My ex-wife. I was repairing a pipe in the bathroom sink. I tell her, please give me a glass. I need to drink water from the sink tap. She screams, are you crazy? Go to the kitchen fountain. The water in the bathroom fountain, you never have to drink it. She believed that all over the world we had 2 types of water and double pipes that carry 2 types of water in each house. One for the kitchen and one for the bathroom. I guess you had your reason to divorce her. Lawyer. Mickey, you can't divorce Minnie for being extremely silly. Mickey, I didn't say she was extremely silly. I said she was freaking goofy. Whoa. Not a divorce attorney, but my stepdad loved World of Warcraft more than my mom, and my brother, sister, and I. He got pretty toxic, and then just left after some crazy stuff he did. Lawyers who read wills to families. What is the most interesting, bizarre, offensive, surprising thing you have had to read out loud? My grandfather hated his neighbor. They lived next to each other for 20 plus years. I remember well my grandfather raging at every opportunity about this guy. We never saw them speak to each other. In grandpa's will he left the guy $10K, a car and golf clubs. We were dumbstruck. Turns out they were good buddies from the army. When they coincidentally bought homes next to each other, they decided to play a long scam with both their families. They actually played golf together 2-3x per week and had a monthly poker game for years. That's an extremely long con. I like your grandpa's style. To my daughter Anne, who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear 4th husband John, who laid hands on my Jane. I leave $1, you money grubbing bastards. To Jane I'll leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000 and my best gun, which I'll leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he beats John bloody during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail, please. Other than names, this is the exact wording of a great uncle's will, part of it anyway. At age 9 Jean told her mother that John had physically shamed her and her mother told her she deserved it for being a mess. So great uncle took Jean in and raised her, and his 2 kids got exactly what it says. His son also got a truck and technically a house, although he only kept it until Jean was a legal adult and could afford the tax on it. Bill got full custody of Jane when his father died, and he put every penny of her money into a trust fund to mature when she was 25 because he felt like his sister would try to get the money. He was right. And in case anyone wondered, yes, Bill got his $5,000. He didn't get arrested though because John had a warrant on him, so they didn't dare call the cops. Bill did kindly inform the police of his whereabouts a few weeks later. That is beautiful. Something about revenge from beyond the grave, or at least on the way to it. Not a lawyer, but sort of a sad story. When my dad's mother died, her will stipulated that everything was to be liquidated and the money distributed equally between her children and grandchildren. Fine, but literally everything had to be sold. There were family heirlooms, jewelry, things my grandfather, a carpenter, had made. So many sentimental family things that my father and his siblings badly wanted, but it all had to be sold. They all went to the auction to try to buy some of the more sentimental items but weren't always successful. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not sure what made my grandmother think it would be a good idea. Nobody wanted the money. They wanted her wedding ring and the clocks my grandfather had made and all that. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not sure what made my grandmother think it would be a good idea. Nobody wanted the money. They wanted her wedding ring and the clocks my grandfather had made and all that. Most likely she didn't want her family fighting over her belongings. I used to work for an accountant and we used to make wills as well. An old man probably around 70 left all his money to his mistress while his wife only got the goldfish. I had to tell him that if his wife contested it she would most definitely win. He said he didn't care. Just to clear up confusion, I'm for Australia not USA. I thought it was in there but it wasn't. Goldfish. The estate that smiles back. Not me, but my friend's father's father died, and he said when the guy reviewed the will with his lawyer and his sister, it said to give 100% of the assets to his sister. He said he had no idea why his father did that. He wasn't on bad terms or anything. It was shocking to him. The sister didn't share anything with him either, and they were on pretty good terms before that. When my great uncle died, he left his beloved dog to his longtime girlfriend. All of his money went into a pet trust for said dog, which turned out to be quite a large sum of money. His 2 kids got nothing. As far as I know, he didn't have a bad relationship with them or anything. He just thought the world of his little dog. I'm always confounded by stories like that. One summer I worked as an administrative assistant to a lawyer who worked in wills and estates. Most of it was the usual petty arguing about percentages of money, but one couple was deeply concerned about which of their children would receive the urn with the ashes of the family's long deceased cat. Wouldn't want to play favorites. One of my college buddies' dad died from cancer in our 2nd year. It wasn't a sudden death. He had been battling it for a couple years. When my friend came back to school, he casually mentioned that his dad left him and his sister $7 million each. Turns out, his dad had hit the lottery before my friend was born, invested, put all the money away to help pay for college, high school. His mom got a nice chunk of change also. He grew up thinking they were just ordinary middle class family. We had a glorious 3rd and 4th year of college, thanks to my loaded friend. He did know his dad won the lottery, but it was never mentioned to him or his sister that it was a lot of money. He grew up thinking they were just ordinary middle class family. I think that was his entire motivation. Wanting nothing but not raising a bunch of entitled little shoots. Not me, but a friend post. Someone had left an entire golf course that he owned and managed in secret to his son. They were avid golfers, but always went to another course. I still don't know why someone would lie about owning a golf course. Some people like surprises. I'd be thrilled if my dad had been hiding a golf course from me for all these years as a big reveal when he died. My will has something unusual. Story time. I sat my wife down to have the talk because I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq. This was during the incredible sectarian violence, and I wanted to make sure she knew everything to do in case I died. She's never serious, ever, but I wanted her to be serious for this discussion because it was damned important. I get through telling her all about it, and want to know if she has questions. Yeah, so, the life insurance. How does that work? She says. I don't really know, baby. What do you mean? She answers, well, do they just put the money in there? Look, she's not trying to be an butthole, right? It's not like she's just dying for the money. She wants to know the logistics of it. I'm sitting here thinking when she says, so do they put in my bank account? Or do they give you one of those big checks when you win the lottery? As she holds her hands up like she's holding a huge check. Laughter ensues. I have it written into the will that if I'm Kia, I want the $400k to be given to her with a gigantic lottery check. Have base photo bring several folks over. Shoot like the paparazzi as she stands on a stage. And do it. LOL. Glad you made it back. And it sounds like you two have an awesome dynamic. Not exactly a reading of the will story, but in the same realm. When I was like 20, my dad told me that when he died I would be getting a chunk of money. Not millions, but enough to do something good with. Years later he and my mom separated. He met a new woman and got married. After talking to my brother and sister, we were all worried that she would change his will or get him to change it in favor of her kids. We agreed that we didn't want money but just wanted any final wishes to be honored. The money couldn't hurt though. Sadly after that he got cancer and died 2 years ago. After he died my siblings and I agreed to just accept however his widow divided anything. She made sure things went where he had decided. My percentage was smaller because he had added her and her children. In the 2 years since he passed she hasn't talked to us much. She calls for holidays and stuff. She tries but she is just kinda awkward. She's also sent large sums of money on 2 occasions because she sold some land he owned. She has shown me and my siblings that there are still good people. Sure, she might have kept most of the money, but she could have kept all of the money and we would never have known. You should call her and tell her that. She might be distant and awkward, but hearing from you that her kindness and honesty is noticeable and appreciated might make her feel pretty dang good about herself and how she's handled things. My father's going to read his will to us before he dies, presuming he's not taken suddenly. Imagine Christmas but depressing. So that's why you hate Santa. When I was 16 my dad wrote me out of his will and then hung himself in the garage. It was few months after my older brother had died in a car wreck. Funny thing is, we always got along. I was then kicked out of the house by his wife, without a single thing that was mine. It was on Christmas Eve, so I went to my mom's for a night, and when I came back to my dad's, the locks were changed. Not a single shirt, not a shoe, not a sock, nothing but the cloths on my back and the change in my pocket. When I was a clerk in law school at the State Court of Appeals, the adult children of a rich woman tried to invalidate the will. Basically the woman was worth about $8 million and all the children were working professionals earning 6 or 7 figures. Well, the woman had used the same hairdresser for multiple years and left a considerable amount in a trust for the hairdresser's children's education. The remainder of the estate was given to different charities. Basically the kids were mad they didn't get a cut. How it turned out, truth is I don't know. We remanded on some procedural issues and I never followed up on it. If it comes up, like, if you're wealthy, leaving $1,000 to each kid will make it a lot more difficult to invalidate. Leave them nothing and they can create a lot of doubt and questions. One of my former bosses was getting up in age and had no children. One day we were discussing family history and he mentioned how he still had the old family Bible his grandparents brought over from Germany, with the whole family tree handwritten into it, which I thought was an amazing thing to have. But he went on to lament that when he died it was going to have to go to his ungrateful, good-for-nothing niece since the old rules of inheritance said she should get it, even though he knew she didn't care a thing about the family history. Several of us involved in the discussion tried to convince him that there had to be some other family member that would give it the respect it deserved, or barring that, a historical society that would know what to do with it. But he would have none of it, since that just isn't the way it is done. Years later I thought of this while attending his funeral and tried to figure out who was that niece, maybe in hopes of broaching the subjects with her, but never could. I still wonder about it sometimes and hope, for his sake, that it ended up in good hands. Lawyer here, not a thing with reading the will, just my favorite. Testator, dying guy, wanted to leave bequests to pretty much everybody he had known who was still living. In 3 countries, 1% to this guy, 2% to that lady. Then he kept changing his mind about one beneficiary or the other, which required the development of a spreadsheet to recalculate all the other bequests whenever he would change that guy's gift from 1% to 1.5%. Fortunately for sanity it was a pot of cash. If he had changed physical bequests, half my spoons to my cousin Lydia, the other half, no, 5/8, we would have had to kill him. There is one famous device in a will from New York. A rich man left everything to his wife, provided she remarried. The will supposedly had the explanation that the testator put this condition on the will because he wanted to make sure at least one person truly mourned his death. I bequeath all my property to my wife on the condition that she remarry immediately. Then there will be at least one man to regret my death. Heinrich Heine, 1797 to 1856, German poet, journalist and literary critic, said on his deathbed, not in his will I think. Title examiner here. I once read a will where the dissident left his presumably gay son the 12 feet of rope in my tool shed, so the F can do us all a favor and hang himself. His words, not mine. There are some truly terrible people in this world. What a horrific man. An ancestor of mine in the rural UK in the 1700s died and left his farm and everything to his nephew. No children, with his surviving wife only getting the second best bed and a provision her to receive 3 pounds of butter per week for the rest of her life. We thought this was incredibly mean, but we wonder whether this butter was meant as an income. I mean, who can eat 3 pounds of butter? On behalf of my dad here, he one time had a woman leave millions of dollars to 3 stray cats that she had been feeding and he had to go catch them and put them in crates to be shipped to Texas where they live a life of luxury in a cat resort. Another guy had a safety deposit box that was massive, like the size of a small dresser. Inside it was filled with coins that they had to count. Turns out it was several $100,000 worth of coins. Me and my wife went to a lawyer to have our wills drafted. The lawyer told us of a client he had that had a great deal of money. His kids were fighting over it before he was dead. The man liked the monkey exhibit in the local zoo. He liked to just watch them all the time. When he died, the lawyer had to tell his family he willed all of his money and estate to the zoo for the monkey exhibits. He now has a bench dedicated to his honor at one of the local zoos. He said they were livid and tried to fight. Lesson is, don't be petty and greedy, love your family unconditionally. He know how a bench dead over is to his honor. Can you please take another shot at this sentence? I'm actually really interested in this story and would like to know what he how know a bench dead of over is in his honor. Years ago, worked in a retirement community. Older man we knew was gay developed a late in life relationship and moved into the community with his gay lover. He was a career vet, multiple honors, a wall of medals. He was also a bit off in butthole most days, but he had moments over a meal. His stories were fantastic. His children over 3 years never once visited him. He had a heart attack and knew he was going to die. His children showed up but demanded his lover leave for visits. In his will he left everything to his lover and his lover's one child from a former marriage. He wrote a long note about his kids' hypocrisy of not visiting and their attitudes toward his lover. He left each of his 2 kids a pail of coal ash to be deducted from his estate, had his estate pay for his lover's plot to be next to him and his wife, and in his long letter that his kids, if they visited him in his death, would be reminded of why they didn't visit while he was alive. It was frankly awesome hearing his kids blow up about it. My sister spent a couple years working for a long-standing organization in Philly that's been accepting bequeathments since the late 18th century. Her job was to help organize the various trusts they had to administer, as well as going around advising people not to do things like this and just leave them a lump sum. People had a habit of leaving them an annual trust. That $5 a year was a princely sum in 1813, but by now it's just a complete nuisance. Or of leaving them ridiculously specific things to do every year. The worst example I remember, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, was a woman who left funds to purchase books for schoolchildren in Liberia. Problem is, her funds now don't buy more than a couple books, and she left instructions for someone to deliver the books, not to ship them. A delivery driver is someone. 3. When my grandparents on my mother's side were dying of cancer, my uncle, black sheep, piece of crap of the family who I've never met thank God, wanted to know what he was getting from the inheritance when they died. Not how's mom and dad or what can I do to help. My grandparents, being the people they were still going to give him an inheritance after all the fricked up things he did to them, but my mom, the power of attorney, convinced them that they shouldn't be manipulated by him anymore. They ended up writing him an email back telling him that he wouldn't be included in the will anymore. He ended up threatening to burn their house down, my house down, killing me and my family etc. for betraying him. And you know what my grandparents did? They ended up including him in the will and sending him exactly 1 penny in check form by mail. That was the last time I have heard from him since. I work for a brokerage firm and I often deal with account beneficiaries. We had a client leave his entire account to a stripper. After the client died, his wife discovered her husband had left his life savings to Jean Sparkles Smith. She was really P. Lawyer here. We normally don't actually do a reading of the will here like they do in the movies. It's much more boring. We just fire up the probate and send notice to all the heirs. The weirdest one I saw was a guy that was worth about $2 million who left my car a jacket and $1 to my son. I hope it keeps him warm when he winds up sleeping under a bridge. The kid had a drug issue. I also had someone leave an antique commode to one of his kids. Yes, he considered an elderly toilet to be a family heirloom. The guy was actually pretty excited to get the toilet. It was the last thing they had left to remember their grandma by. I crap you not. Pun intended. My parents have started their death cleanup. Those were my brother's words. Every time we visit they are asking us if there is something that they have that we want, and if so, for us to take it. They don't call it a death cleanup, but I have to applaud my little brother. That's what it feels like and he called it on them. I'm refusing to participate. I always say no, and my little brother is the most honest altruistic person you can ever meet, so he does too. But this Christmas I was in the garage with my dad and I saw this wooden model boat that I had never seen before. It was a beautiful painted 1.5-foot boat that my dad had made in carpentry class or whatever you call it in English when he was in school. The mast was broken. It had been somewhere at our summer house, as we say in Sweden, and I had never seen it. It was actually that house he grew up in, but that's a different story. At least as far as I can remember right now. My little brother helps out there a lot. I bet they stumbled across it and they saw it, and my little brother was as emotional about the thing as I was, since it had been something our dad made when he was younger than either of us. I understand if he said yes if my dad said why don't you take it. The point of my story is that I have a little brother that can't lie, has proven to be as altruistic as anyone comes, but for a second I turned into Soren because of something my dad wanted to give him. A friend had 2 sisters when their father passed away. Their mom had died in their childhood. Anyway, years go by and the oldest daughter is the only one who keeps in contact with the father for various reasons. Dude was an abusive dong, played favorites, all of that crap. Older sister was obviously the favorite as she got everything. The other daughter and son, my friend, got $1 apiece. Oldest sister could have been a dong about it but decided to be pro status. They all sat down to dinner on a night and big sister was like, listen, dad left me all of this. It was a pretty sizable amount of money. She could have taken it and lived comfortably without working till the day she died. Maybe. Definitely. If she managed the money proper. She sat down with her little brother and sister and was like 3 ways even? Deal. End of it. You all would think that you would do the same for your brother, sister, best friend, whatever. You'd be surprised what people are really like when money is involved, even a small amount of it. Fricked up. Not in this case though. I am not a lawyer but I am deputy public administrator and we find wills often. We deal with individuals who died without any known family or the family is estranged and we have to locate them. One of the wills I read said no fricking lawyers in the text and another one stated I would like crack powder stuffed in my ears and cremated. I'm a trust attorney. I can't tell you how many times the surviving spouse from a blended marriage cuts out the stepkids. They always try to justify it to me even though I really don't care. I'm not there to judge. Los Angeles residents are especially concerned about their pets. I've written trust where the pets inherit more than the kids. It's always awkward when I have to tell a child they were disinherited. No easy way to tell a person that. Not a lawyer, but an estate planning paralegal for many years. I've read, drafted or executed thousands of wills and trusts with clients. My first nitpicky comment is that the common belief that lawyers actually assemble the whole family and hold a reading of the will is entirely a construct of TV. You would never sit there and just read a will to people. It's mostly a bunch of legalese about bonds and payment of taxes and the powers of the executor. Only a very small portion of the will actually pertains to distributions, and in many cases it's just a paragraph stating that everything goes to the spouse if living, otherwise equally to the kids, or to the trust, which then says it all goes to spouse then kids. Believe it or not, they are usually pretty mundane. When strings are attached, it's usually just parents trying to make sure their kids go to college or they get a smaller distribution, or just have to wait longer to get their money. People who don't have kids usually name about 24 beneficiaries, which is cumbersome and annoying, especially since a lot of times they don't even have much money to divide. People with kids almost always just leave the money to them equally. Probably the most fricked up thing I've seen is a couple different clients who included provisions to disinherit kids and grandkids if they married a black person. But that's their prerogative, and we'll serve them professionally, but we tended not to get too cozy or chatty at those signings. Unlike with many of the nice clients with whom we would become friendly. Just get him in, get him out in those cases. I'm not a lawyer, but my family has an odd story involving a will. Several generations back, a woman, along with her brothers, in our family inherited a huge sum of money from her father, oil money in Oklahoma. At the time, women were allowed to inherit property assets if single, but all assets would have been transferred to her husband if she married. She wasn't too happy about the situation and, in protest, never took a husband. She had a few friends over the course of her life and lived a very comfortable life until dying of old age, at which time, her estate was divided amongst all of the female descendants in the family. TL. DNR. My great aunt of something was a bad but feminist B. Lawyers who fought cases against people who decided to forego a real lawyer. How badly did they blow their case? I was doing a full domestic abuse case and the defendant had a lawyer, failed to pay that lawyer and then refused to show for court. The judge was tired of the delay so he would not postpone again. The defendant attempted to ask himself questions in the third person from the witness stand. It was one of the fastest actual trial I ever participated in that went to a verdict. Ask himself questions in the third person. That's the absolute best. While I was studying law, I was observing at a local magistrate court. This guy who was representing himself turned to the other party and opened with, "So, we meet again." The other guy's was his next door neighbor. It was a hedge dispute. The judge postponed the case on the spot and ordered him to come back after he get a legal aid lawyer. The first case I ever tried was a speeding case against a pro se guy who took the stand and accidentally confessed to it. He also had a video which he tried to lay the foundation for 30 minutes before giving up. I saw a guy who had a couple DUIs in his past take a stab at it. He sat in on so much court and saw way more trials than I had before my first jury trial. But there really isn't a replacement for some of the stuff they teach in law school. He lost and was clearly floundering at points, despite having a well-polished open. I also saw a pro se one time put up nothing. No open, no evidence, no real crosses or close and win. I interned with the ability to have all the rights of a municipal prosecutor for my 2L summer internship. Most people represented themselves because it was small stuff like disorderly conduct or speeding tickets. No big deal. My favorites were the ones who, when making mitigating statements to try to get the judge to lower their fines, would mention that I was their lawyer. Yeah, no, I was actually the polar opposite of your lawyer. My favorites were the ones who, when making mitigating statements to try to get the judge to lower their fines, would mention that I was their lawyer. Yeah, no, I was actually the polar opposite of your lawyer. Please explain further, for law noobs. Not a lawyer, but a rental property manager who goes to court often for work. We don't end up in full-blown civil trials that often, but when we do it's usually against a defendant who is trying to represent themselves. The last 2 trials ended up with the judge giving the defendants 15 minutes recesses so they could stop sobbing uncontrollably. Needless to say, those cases were blown in comical fashion. You have to give us more than that. My father was an Ada assistant district attorney. He once prosecuted a DUI case where the defendant was acting as his own counsel. His main defense was since he was a chronic alcoholic, his baseline blood alcohol content was already at least 0.5 all the time, so that needed to be subtracted from whatever the breathalyzer had read. Needless to say, he lost the case. TLDR. My son's mother represented herself during our child custody case. My lawyer never even spoke to her. It was that bad. I have full custody of our son as a result. My son's mother was a chronic drug abuser and alcoholic. After seeing an empty beer can in her backseat when picking my son up from her one day, joint physical custody, I decided to ask a few questions. My son was 12 at the time, and though I know it's considered poor form to ask your child about the habits of the other parent, I wanted to know about her drinking habits with him being around. It turned out she would regularly drink and drive. When court came around, she thought she had me right where she wanted me. She delivered a summons to my lawyer herself, which nullifies the summons because it has to be delivered by a third party. During discovery we requested her cell phone records, Facebook password, smartphone records, think pictures, IM, etc. Although it's slightly embarrassing to admit how much I enjoyed watching her squirm after she asked her line of questioning. It was great to have my lawyer tell the judge she had no questions to ask my ex-girlfriend. You could see the shock and horror on her face at the instant realization that she did so poorly herself that the lawyer didn't need to ask anything. Bonus moment. My son's mother asked if I was the one that called social services on her 6 times. My response was genuine. From the stand I shouted Jesus Christ. 6 times? I only knew about twice. But no, I've never called them. I know 2 people called them on her, but I never did. Lord, this is scary. I hope your son is okay. For what it's worth, a story regarding a pro se defendant. I was representing a client in a criminal case where she was charged with not sending her kid to school. So some case study referenced this one case from about 20 years earlier. That case was the case to go to for anyone charged with not sending their kid to school. Anyway, the more I read the case, the more familiar it all sounded. The father represented himself pro se at trial and lost. He files a pro se appeal and it gets reversed. The case was styled something like State vs. Davis and kept referring to the child that didn't go to school as DD. I put the timeline together and realized this kid was in my class in grade school. I knew him. He never attended school. The appellate decision wrote about the kid having health problems and constant nosebleeds. All sorts of things. But he didn't have any of that. He always attended the first day, Halloween, Christmas and the last day of school. Those were the days treats and candy were handed out. Any other day he was gone and this went on for years. But in the 6th grade this kid was the guy to go to if you needed bike parts. I stopped by his house after school one day looking for some tube forks or something. He opens the door to his garage, wall to wall bikes. There must have been over 100. His deal was that all day long he would just go school to school and steal bikes off the rack. I think he eventually dropped out in the 8th grade and I'm not sure how he even made it that far, except that his parents seemed very litigious, so maybe the schools didn't want to get on their bad side. Halfway through an unfair dismissal case, the employee apparently accepted that his dismissal was fair. For the first time in my career I was speechless for about a minute. I thought carefully about what he said and what it meant. Should I rest my case on the spot like in a courtroom drama? I'd always wanted to do that and this could be my only chance. What he had actually said was I would have fired me too in those circumstances. I figured that technically, he had some wriggle room there. After all, he hadn't said that his hypothetical self-dismissal would have been fair. So I pretended like it was a glitch in the matrix and carried on. Yeah, just because he says he would have fired himself too, doesn't mean he's saying the dismissal was justified in law. Definitely some wiggle room. Really good statement to highlight in your closing though. Got sued by the property management company I was renting from. I declined a lawyer and just read the judge our documented damages sheet from when we moved in. Explained that the company couldn't have redone the floors as the new tenants were in the following day, and asked the PM company why on earth I would steal the screens to the windows. Ended up with a full refund on my security deposit and winning the case. Everyone here has a story about how bad they fail. I figure I should give a story of one that hasn't. My ex took her landlord to court. Her landlord was awful. She would come in for inspections without actually booking or notifying my ex. She was not cleaning or paying to have the black mold cleaned and removed, and basically just broke every rule. So my ex took her to court when her landlord tried to take her damaged deposit for the removal of the mold as well as a pipe that burst, which she routinely told her landlord was an issue and could happen. So yeah, you can win. But just be smart about it. Save everything that might be useful. She had every email about the stuff saved, every call recorded. She had dated pictures of all the stuff she sent her landlord about the pipes and mold, and in the end, she won. If you practice long enough, there will be the one pro se litigant on the other side that wins. They won't know jack crap but somehow pull it off. I feel like the one who is in the right should win, regardless of who they are being represented by. Then again, we are talking about law, so right and wrong are $signs or something, I don't know. I represented myself in a family law case and won. Nobody really wins in family law unless you are a psychopath. Basically it was a divorce and we had a son. Ex-wife's mother hated me and decided to fork over a bunch of money for my ex to have a great lawyer. I had $0. The ex accused me of domestic violence. Everything she said was a lie. Complete fiction. She wanted to be able to take our son and move to another state, deny me visitation and have me pay child support. I was having none of that. I wanted 50/50 custody. When we went to mediation, the mediator did not believe her and wrote a scathing report in my favor. I ended up with full custody and she had visitation. I didn't seek child support. In court I mostly just kept my mouth shut. The judge did help me and my ex did everything she could to hurt herself. The day the trial was supposed to start, I reached an agreement with her lawyer. I was prepared but very nervous about the trial and was glad to avoid it. It was very stressful and I do not recommend representing yourself in court, but in my case it worked out. Really enjoyed your story. Glad you won. Collections attorney here. The majority of cases I have are against pro se defendants because they don't think they can afford an attorney. The vast majority of them don't show up to court or answer the complaint and get defaulted. When they actually defend the case, many try to research the law online and make arguments that they find on forums. Problem is that they don't fully understand what they are saying. I've had many defendants try to assert the statute of limitations under the UCC, rather than the standard breach of contract SOL because it's shorter and they think it applies because they bought goods with their loan or credit card. Sorry, but the 6-year SOL applies in a simple breach of contract action. In other situations, they have defenses that they could assert but they don't know that and I'm not allowed to give them legal advice. The only thing I can say is that I strongly suggest getting an attorney. Basically, if you don't know what you're doing, then get an attorney or go to a legal aid services clinic. You will not win by googling stuff and reading message boards. The legal aid services clinics are a good idea, and, maybe, just buy an actual law book or something. A more interesting question, for me, is qualified lawyers. Do you represent yourself for civil trials? I have my degree. I know how to write pleadings. I know the legal system. Why should I pay someone else to do all this work? The problem is that you are emotionally invested in the case, which makes thinking rational and objective thinking harder. A friend of mine successfully defended himself against charges he got for protesting. He had no formal legal education, just had been on probation for 10 years and been through the system. I'm a cop and I sometimes get cross-examined by people acting as their own attorney in municipal court. I once arrested this guy for being drunk in public to the point of being a danger to himself and he decided to fight it. The city attorney questioned me and asked if I recognized the accused. I said I did and pointed out the guy that was sitting in the defendant's chair. I will call him Mr. Smith. We went through my testimony for the city about what I saw and so on. Then it became time for Mr. Smith to question me. He brought up the fact that I said I recognized him from that night, which was about 6 months ago. I said yes. Mr. Smith, so you say you recognize me from that night? Me, yes. Mr. Smith, is there anything different about me from that night? Me, I don't know what you mean. Mr. Smith, so you are saying that I'll look exactly the same as that night? Is that what you are saying here in court under oath? Me, well you aren't drunk right now. You are wearing a shirt now and you don't look like you have urinated on yourself. Mr. Smith, no further questions. He ended up stating in his closing arguments that while he doesn't dispute that he is in fact Mr. Smith, he thinks I don't remember the case because he had a car wreck a few days after the arrest and now has a scar on his face that I didn't notice. Since I didn't notice that, I can't be telling the truth about the incident. Guilty. This is a counterpoint to the usual stories here. My father is a divorce lawyer who represented himself in court. Because he didn't hire a lawyer and my mother did, he was able to file spurious claims, get the other side caught up in procedure, and use a lot of tricks to force more billable hours on the other side. My mother's lawyer said, "You need to fire me, because this guy is trying to bankrupt you." That's not your father winning, that's him abusing the system and screwing your mother over. I'm up against pro-per litigants all the time in administrative hearings. The judges are fairly indulgent. The rules of evidence and civil procedure aren't as strictly applied as in the superior court, and the judges are willing to grant a continuance for just about anything. I have no problem with this. The only real criticism I level is that since the complainants are pro-per, they don't have much guidance on the merits of their cases prior to hearing. An attorney would have advised the litigant you did not meet the statutory requirement here. You have no case, and the court will not grant you the exception you want. If you waste time and money on this, it will not result in any sufficient sympathy from the judge to get the result you would like. Edited. As opposing counsel, I can discuss the case with the pro-per litigant, but I'm prohibited from giving legal advice. The purposes of my discussions here are typically to make sure of the facts and arguments, see if there's any possibility of resolution, and avoid wasting time preparing for or arguing irrelevant issues. In family law it happens so often that the court is a bit more forgiving, overlooking some of the stricter rules of evidence and allowing opposing parties to speak freely and explain points raised by the other side, even though it isn't their turn. This being said, We're always getting shittily written letters directly from the other side. In law, if you're represented by a lawyer, you can't directly communicate with the other side. It has to be through your lawyer. Obviously, if you represent yourself, you communicate directly. Not that this law stops tards in family law, represented or not, calling us directly to abuse and taunt us, which serves nothing but to cause us to shake our heads at the idiots, and then call their lawyer to complain, which hurts their case and can lead to sanctions being placed. Inaho. So, letters from people directly, always misspelt and cringy. I find if it's a guy, they just write from the heart and lay out what they want or are after, often pretty defeated. If it's a woman, they regurgitate every bit of crappy advice from the internet and mothers groups, leading to total diarrhea on a page with legal buzzwords thrown about without the right meaning or context. Everything is in Charlie-esque bird law lawyeries. Hara for you with and unto we the undersigned verily plead that you cease intercourse post haste. Through reading you can practically see the crap eating grin on their faces when they sent it, thinking they showed us and beat us at our own game. They also tend to copy our letters verbatim with structure and layout, just with the roles reversed. You have to call them and try to explain to them how they are totally wrong and none of this makes sense, which never goes down well, as not only are they extremely hostile, they think we're just trying to screw them and lie. This transfers to the courtroom. All the not done movie tropes are there. The walking around, the aggressive, attacking questions, not to mention the sexy streetwalker approximation of formal court dress. They use crap evidence like text messages they made themselves, terribly photoshopped printouts of Facebook conversations and printouts from websites of law summaries and forum discussions that prove their point, and they yell out crap. It's all very embarrassing. Even lawyers don't represent themselves, even when they know what they are doing. Get representation. And even if you do represent yourself, don't pretend to know what you're doing. No specific instances, but what usually messes people up is thinking they are smart and arrogant. That trick you thought of isn't going to work. That so-called clever wording isn't going to fool anyone. That arrogant attitude isn't going to impress anyone. Don't try to show off or be clever. Just present your case, with actual evidence, and for the most part, you should do fine. Most judges know you don't know the law and will try to make it work with the facts you present. A sad, but funny one I will mention, is a guy representing himself in a custody dispute. His wife is claiming that he's violent and has a temper, with police reports, photos and witnesses backing up her claim, but the guy tries to present himself as this overly nice guy who never gets mad and wouldn't hurt a fly, saying that she is making everything up. Huge red flag since he totally oversold it. Anyway, during the proceedings, the opposing lawyer starts messing with him and the guy gets pee off and blows his top. Lost pretty much all credibility after that. My dad once got an illegal parking ticket and chose to fight it himself. In the courtroom he asked the cop where he put the ticket. On your front windshield. My dad said I ride a motorcycle. I don't have a windshield. Everyone had a laugh and he didn't have to pay the ticket. I am an attorney in a government agency investigating and prosecuting violations of an act that has its own unique administrative law history and rules and rulings. We don't run into too many pro se opposing parties, but we do occasionally get attorneys who attempt to represent their clients before our agency who are clueless to our subset of law. Since our initial investigation is non-adversarial, sometimes attorneys who do not regularly practice before our agency will seek our advice on case law and/or rules and regulations that are pertinent to our investigation, and we are happy to provide that information to those attorneys who are inclined to do so, though once we sue, it's adversarial and we do not offer any friendly guidance to opposing parties. Unfortunately, in my experience, attorneys attempting to practice in our area of law who do not regularly practice before our agency do not seek any guidance from us and/or do not take heed to any guidance that we offer. It usually ends up costing their clients needlessly, in time and money, when the issues leading to our investigation end up leading to a lawsuit and costly remedies. An ill-informed attorney, many times, is much more costly and damaging to a client than pro se representation. You sound like you work for a regulatory agency like FDA or USDA. Get a reckless driving citation. 6 months license suspension, just pay the fine and ignore it. Never turn in license, thus never getting credit. Get caught driving on a suspended license, an additional year suspension, just pay the fine and ignore it. Happens a few more times, an additional year-long suspension each time. Never getting credit for the suspension. Ignore it, but then a warrant goes out for mandatory 30 days in jail. Plus 6.5 years of license suspension. If caught driving again, another 30 days in jail. Poor fella. Very badly. To the point that at some time you just have to stop as the carnage was so bad it made one ill. Contract dispute on car repairs. I represented the garage owner. Car owner that had skipped on his bill decided to represent himself. I was asked why I needed a lawyer to represent me for a case involving the federal government. My reply, because I want to win, is often dismissed by whoever I'm talking to. Disclaimer: I taught law and ethics at the university level. Additional: yes, the lawyer I hired did an incredible job. I don't really like handling cases against pro se litigants. First of all, it's assumed you are going to win no matter what, and if you lose, your clients think you are an idiot. Second, they are a pain in the butt and they slow down the trial and they all think they are TV lawyers. Third, I feel slightly bad when I eviscerate them, and they could have had a good case if they had gotten a real lawyer, but they pee me off, so they shall feel my wrath. I'm dictating this from my dad. He got a speeding ticket years ago in Detroit at this weird intersection. He was pulling out of a gas station onto a high traffic road that goes from 55 to 35 coming into the city. The speed limit changes about 500 feet down the road in the direction he was going. So he was waiting to pull out for a while given the traffic, and finally finds an opening. So he pulls out, but since it's 55 he hits the gas kinda hard to avoid getting rear-ended. He hit 51 miles per hour 500 feet later where a cop had a speed trap set up, and he wrote him a ticket for speeding. My dad goes to traffic court, and the judge is tearing into these people for having bad excuses for speeding and other traffic violations, especially the guy right before him, which made my dad nervous. So when it was his turn, he went up, and the officer presented his statement. The judge looked at my dad expectantly, like he thought it was cut and dry and waiting for my dad to cave. He slowly started explaining what happened when the judge interrupted him and asked where exactly the gas station was. As soon as the judge recognized it, he said something like, "Ooh, I hate that spot. It takes like 5 minutes to pull out into traffic from the bottleneck that speed change makes. Yeah, I see what you're saying now." And he found my dad not guilty on the spot. So my dad avoided the $65 ticket and just had to pay $53 court fees. Cause, you know, logic. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.